The sun shone brightly on the modern city. A blue bus was driving along the road. Inside was a route map hanging on the window. Suddenly the alarm went off, the alarm light came on and the sound of a siren appeared. The main character thought that it was a very ordinary day. Beads of sweat ran down his face and he bit his lower lip. Bus passengers noticed something strange. The main character was also confused. He decided that they were filming a movie here and that it was a doll. But it looked strange. The protagonist had black hair and brown eyes, and his skin was pale. At the front of the cabin stood a green goblin with an axe in his hand. He had sharp fangs and bared his teeth ominously. More goblins appeared inside the bus and attacked passengers. The main character believed that on this day he saw hell. Screams of horror were heard everywhere. People begged for help. Someone started dialing the emergency phone number with a shaking hand. Suddenly, several passengers' heads were cut off at once. People looked in horror at the severed heads and screamed. The goblins immediately began to tear apart the headless body. They laughed loudly. The passengers looked very scared and worried. The main character grabbed the strap of his backpack, gritting his teeth. He could not calm down because he knew what would happen next. He looked at the corpses in the bus, knowing that almost everyone here would not live even a minute. This was a massacre. The bloody glass on the bus was broken. The man grabbed his wounded shoulder, screaming loudly. The teenager sat on the floor, clutching his head and sobbing. 80% of the population of Seoul will be destroyed, including children and adults, without any exception. Images of goblins beating the guy appeared in his head. One of the goblins grabbed a spear and pierced the victim. The werewolf with red eyes opened his mouth wide. Org brutally attacked another victim. The main character said that the value of his talent as a player is 0. He frowned angrily, gritting his teeth, sweat running down his face. With a sword in his hands, he tried to defend himself from a horde of enemies, calling himself a mediocre player. Jongno, Seoul, 2028. The sun's rays warmed the air of the area located near the reservoir. A class was taking place at the university. The teacher was dictating something to his students. Young people stood in line at a small food stall. 2 students were sitting at a table outside, talking about an exam that one of them had failed. The main character put rice with eggs and sausages on his table. One of the students asked what to do, since this was his 3rd attempt to pass the exam. He was told to forget about training to become a civil servant and look for a job. The main character's name is Hyuk-jin. He is 30 years old. He was wearing a blue sweatshirt. He is studying, trying to pass the civil servant exam and has spent 7 years on this. He considered himself an ordinary person without the talent of a player. 10 years ago, gates opened in Seoul that looked like portals. Horrible events swept through the city. A handful of survivors awakened and began to be called players. Hyuk-jin also had a dream of becoming a player, but he abandoned it due to lack of talent. Now all his thoughts are occupied with the exam. He started to eat his rice when a student nearby asked the other person if he had seen T-Woong's video yesterday. The guy in the blue shirt asked how someone could fight so well. His friend told him that that's why they call him God T-Woong. He believed that he would be like that too if he had talent. The guy in the blue t-shirt looked at him and replied that they were ordinary people, so all that remained was to take the civil servant exam. They noticed Hyuk-jin and started talking about him, saying that in the past he passed the player's ability text and collected 67 talent panels, which was a Korean record. The main character was chewing food, holding a spoon in his hands. The student did not believe the words of his friend, but he told him that his name was a dead genius. The interlocutor asked why then he should sit here and take the exam. He was told that they discovered his talents too late. Hyuk-jin listened to them with an emotionless face and did not interrupt their conversation. The students discussed that 67 panels were discovered in an additional test. At that time the talent panels were closed. Usually the talent panels close around 20, and he was already 30. One of them said that he had lost his future. The main character lowered his head, thinking that he knew this without them. He knows he has no chance of becoming a player. 7 years ago, as a last chance, he took a retest. The result sheet said that 67 panels were found. The number of open panels was 1. The player aptitude test is a government-sponsored test that allows one to determine the presence or absence of talent. Hyuk-jin looked at the results with a confused face. During the passage, you can see the total number of talents and evaluate the open ones. A panel appeared with closed cells, only one was open. The guy only has 1 talent left. For him, this result was worse than a complete lack of talent. Then he did not understand anything. He clenched his teeth and bared his teeth, looking at the screen. The main character did not understand why the head of the Players Association's Human Resources Department came to personally hand over the results to him. The middle-aged man looked at him and said that he heard he was preparing for the civil servant exam. He wished him luck. The windows on the first floor were covered with bars. Hyuk-jin only graduated from high school and was not good at anything in particular. He hoped to become a civil servant player, but he was faced with failure after failure. He failed the 2027 exams, the results displayed on his screen. Reporters asked the armored player how he felt about receiving a very valuable item in the dungeon. The man asked if it was important and said that he was trying to benefit his country. The main character believed that the life of a player is very different from the life of an ordinary person. A girl in formal clothes and armor said that if he had one talent panel, then he had not awakened, and then asked if he had come to register for the exam. Hyuk-jin frowned at her. He believed that empty hopes of becoming a player were too much of a luxury for him. The guy decided to return home and study more. He didn't expect anything from tomorrow. On a stairwell in an apartment complex, a married couple was arguing about the husband's drinking. There were dirty dishes in the kitchen sink. On one of the shelves there was a photograph of a young girl and a woman. Hyuk-jin was sitting at the table and writing something in a notebook. He was thinking that on April 27, 2018, a cataclysm began in Jongno, Seoul. He watched a video where they discussed the terrible events that took place at the beginning of the cataclysm. The man in the video was wearing a brown shirt. He decided to start the lesson with the primordial fog in Seoul. The result was 145,000 dead out of 150,000 affected. The main character looked at the phone screen. The man said that in fact the entire Jongno region was close to total destruction. And when he first saw the primordial fog, he couldn't even stand on his feet. Hyuk-jin picked up the phone. The host's name was Sang Hyun. He played a big role in the beginning of the cataclysm 10 years ago, and has now become a world-famous player. Sang Hyun sat on the office chair in his office and said that whether it was then or now, he can say one thing with confidence. According to him, effort is more important than talent. He is a living example of this and will only become stronger. The main character listened to his speech about effort. He wondered if his efforts really weren't enough. Hyuk-jin closed his eyes and covered his ears with his hands. He believed that now was not the time to think about such useless things. He did not want to get stuck on something that could not be changed. He continued to write in his notebook, thinking that if he had talents, he could awaken as a player, receive an offer from the guard and make his life worth living. The guy pursed his lips and looked to the side. He picked up the yellow envelope and began to take out a sheet of paper. He often has the thought that only he is to blame for everything. He began reading a letter from his mother, who wrote him parting words for life. His mother died of illness. Her funeral photograph stood next to bouquets of flowers. His older sister wanted to escape poverty and got a job at a semiconductor factory, but she became ill with leukemia. She was lying in a hospital bed with a drip. Hyuk-jin believed that he must succeed for the sake of his family. He has no talent, no money, no connections. He failed the exam 3 times. The night sky hung over the city. The streets were illuminated by dim lanterns. The main character didn't know what he was missing. He remembered how he overheard students talking about him at lunch. Hyuk-jin didn't understand when everything went wrong. He thought he made an effort, but it turns out he didn't. The guy lay in his bed and told his mom and sister that he would try harder. He didn't know if his tomorrow would change if he tried harder. The main character clenched his hand tightly into a fist. He did not understand what to do if his life did not change until the very end. He looked at the wall in his room and said that he was so lonely. The digital clock showed 11:58 p.m. 1 minute passed. The number on the clock changed. There was a bright blue flash. Morning came. The clock showed 5:50 a.m. Hyuk-jin grabbed the pillow and groaned protractedly. He wondered what time it was, because today would be the midterm assessment. He sat down and grabbed his head, saying that he went to bed early, but still overslept. He opened his eyes and grabbed the neck of his pajamas, thinking about how he would quickly take a shower and go to the academy. He wondered what time they usually did the assessment. The main character was already sitting at the bus stop. Someone was talking to his mother on the phone. It was announced that buses 370 and 9307 would arrive soon, which was displayed on the board. The guy looked up, thinking that bus 702 would be there in 2 minutes. An old man was standing next to him. Hyuk-jin looked back. He had a feeling that this day was somehow strange. He walked up to the open doors of the bus and looked at the stop. They announced that bus 702 had arrived. The main character looked at the bus, thinking that something was different from a normal morning. He assumed the problem was his mood. Hyuk-jin entered the bus and applied the card to the validator. He decided to look at the notes while going to the academy. He walked further into the cabin. The passengers were chatting about something, and the weather forecast was on the speakerphone. Someone said about the new song of the group Pink Velvet. The main character sat on the seat and took off his backpack, thinking that this old idol group is popular again. but it's hard for him to say. He doesn't watch TV. He picked up a notebook and began to repeat notes about how the cataclysm began 10 years ago. The bus had a yellow license plate. Transport began to move along the 4-lane road. Hyuk-jin read his notes thoughtfully while people discussed the weather and the cold. The main character put his fist to his chin and said that training began along with the primordial fog. Suddenly someone asked what it was, and the guy looked away from his notes. The passengers looked out the window and asked where this fog came from. Hyuk-jin also looked out the window. A gloomy fog filled the road. Visibility was significantly reduced. People began to complain about the stench. The guy also smelled it and covered his nose and mouth with his hand. He knew something was wrong. Someone shouted that he was scared. The main character looked down excitedly. He picked up his phone. An emergency alert appeared on the phone screen. On April 27, 2018, very thick fog appeared in Jongno, which could cause accidents on the roads. We ask drivers to exercise caution. Hyuk-jin frowned and clenched his teeth, looking at the phone screen in confusion. He tensed and put his hand on his chest. He looked at the date and realized it was 10 years ago. The main character began to replay the events of today and realized that now was the day the cataclysm began. His pupils constricted and he looked up. Everything around was immersed in a dark fog. Passengers complained of the stench. The roads were deserted and the sky turned dark blue. Hyuk-jin realized that the entire Jongno area was filled with fog and stench. He looked at his notebook, which described the important events of April 27, 2018 and the signs of the cataclysm. He began to think that if this was true and he was traveling by bus to Jongno, then 145,000 people out of 150,000 would die. He remembered how the goblins killed innocent residents and caused a pogrom. Passengers on the transport said that it was as dark outside as if it were night. Hyuk-jin realized that he had a 97% chance of dying. He went back in time and also knows what will happen next. He frowned and lowered his gaze. Suddenly a system window appeared above his head. Inscription on the system window: "Players, please wait." Several system windows appeared over time. A red system window appears. Training begins. 10 years ago, the first training began in Jongno, Seoul. A gloomy black and red spot appeared above the townspeople. Monsters suddenly poured out of the dungeons and attacked people, leading to a brutal massacre with no chance of resistance. The cataclysm, which lasted a week, was later called training or open beta. Many bloody corpses lay on the road. Almost 150,000 died in the Jongno region alone. The chance of survival is about 3%. There was devastation and darkness on the streets. It was one of the worst days in the history of mankind. However, later people appeared who began to be called players. They quickly suppressed the monsters and gradually dealt with the disaster in Jongno. Several people with spears stood near the mountain of goblin corpses. A guy in armor with a sword in his hands fought against enemies. Guides for specific locations and recordings of player battles began to appear. Thanks to this, it was possible to create virtual dungeons for working out strategies, where people trained with weapons. The reporter stood in front of people with police shields. The world began to recover from the cataclysm. Hyuk-jin frowned and was breathing heavily. He had memorized many raid records and had completed virtual dungeons hundreds of times. There are few people who understand this incident better than him, and although he could not become a real player, he still continued to memorize raid tactics and go through virtual dungeons without much sense, because there he could be the best player in the world. He attacked the goblin with his sword. A system window appears. Training will begin soon. Players, get ready. The main character looked tense, thinking about the fact that after the start of the cataclysm, notifications appeared. He only knew about it in theory, but now he sees it in person. He couldn't believe that he had actually gone back in time. Suddenly the bus stopped abruptly, and the guy managed to grab the handrail at the last moment to avoid falling. The passengers in front of him were also confused and asked if they had hit something. Two people began to panic that they could not see anything, asking what was happening outside. Hyuk-jin pursed his lips and tried to calm down, because this had already happened in the past. He realized that others had not received notifications, so he was the only player here. The guy looked nervous, a bead of sweat running down his cheek. He understood that he would have to use all the information to survive, and he needed to analyze the situation. Several system windows have appeared. An unknown observer is watching you. The unknown observer is interested. Hyuk-jin was surprised and assumed that it was a guard. A new system window has appeared. An unknown observer wants to give you an open beta bonus. The main character was surprised after reading everything. He didn't understand why the guard would do this, because bonuses are usually given to famous players. Guardians are creatures that watch over players. Everyone's fate is decided by what bonuses or privileges the guards decide to bestow. Several guards loomed over the people. They are located in a dimension that is one level above the players. Therefore, the guards use nicknames to communicate with them. A system window appeared. Open beta bonus, eyes of a cool observer. Hyuk-jin looked slightly confused. He pursed his lips and suddenly felt calm. Perhaps this is because of the bonus. It's as if he himself has become an outside observer of what is happening and is watching everything from a third person. A system window appears. The training quest will begin in 10 seconds. The countdown has begun. The bus driver turned to the passengers and said that the fog was too thick to continue traveling, and they would have to travel further themselves. It all started faster than Hyuk-jin thought. People began to be indignant because they would be late. Suddenly the main character frowned and loudly shouted to everyone to lie down on the floor and not come out. This is the only way to survive. The unknown observer was interested in him. Hyuk-jin clenched his teeth and tensed. The schoolgirl pointed forward in horror, and the office worker next to him was also scared. A blue portal appeared not far from the driver. The countdown has ended. A system window has appeared. Mid-level administrators appear. A girl with long white hair began to emerge from the portal. The passengers looked at her in surprise. The girl began to open her yellow eyes. She greeted everyone and spread her angel wings. Her name was Senia and she was a mid-level administrator. Senia looked at the passengers and said that from now on they are in training. Several system windows appeared. Training quest. Stay in the training area for 7 days. You cannot leave the training area. The number of survivors determines the further difficulty. Hyuk-jin looked at the system window with a puzzled expression. He couldn't believe that he had actually returned to the beginning of the cataclysm. He broke from his thoughts and looked ahead. Passengers asked if this could be the filming of a movie. 2 students stood in front of Senia and said that they were not in the mood for pranks and asked to explain what was happening. The white-haired girl looked at them and replied that during training they needed to use all their strength to survive. Suddenly the students looked forward in horror. A bloody man crashed into the windshield. People immediately started shouting that someone had died here and the police should be called. The main character gritted his teeth and looked at it with concern. He said that they scatter the corpses to create fear. This is the strategy of those monsters. The goblins drag the bloody corpse along the road. The goblin army becomes agitated. The first group of goblins has approached the bus and they begin their invasion of the Jongno area. One of the goblins jumped onto the bus window, which scared the passenger. Monsters began to climb onto the roof of the bus. People begged to open the door. Hyuk-jin ordered the doors not to be opened. The goblin swung his weapon. The man lowered his head and grabbed his hair with his hands. The main character watched the invasion with concern. He looked around the inside of the bus, realizing that a massacre would begin outside. They needed to take refuge here. They would think about their chances of survival later. He remembered one of the recordings of the battle with goblins. People received a strategy against their attacks at the cost of 10 years of battles. First of all, you cannot fight them directly. This will lead to death. The guy lowered his head and exhaled, knowing that in 10 years they will not be a threat, but it is unlikely that he will be able to defeat them in training. Goblins are several times stronger than a common person. They will soon break into the bus. The grinning monster swung his hammer. He broke the window on the bus. The passengers saw that the door had been broken through and decided to flee. Hyuk-jin grabbed his backpack and ordered the others to lie down and stay put, but they were too scared. His face looked nervous and anxious, but he ordered to listen to him. If they want to survive, time is short. Panicking passengers began to protest. They still wanted to escape. The main character clenched his teeth, realizing that it was too late and they were no longer going to listen. Several system windows have appeared. An unknown observer is watching your actions with interest. The status window is activated. The inventory is activated. Hyuk-jin looked in shock at the system window that appeared in front of him. System status window, name, Hyuk-jin, player. Level 1, title, none. Stamina 10, Strength 10, Intelligence 12, Agility 11, Perception 11, Spirit 13 plus 30. The main character was surprised that his current stats were so high. He looked at the status window with wide eyes, thinking that even the King of Fists during training had an average of 9. People screamed and shouted that the monsters were breaking in. Hyuk-jin turned to them. Another glass was broken by a goblin with a club. The monsters broke through. The passengers began to panic and sob. One guy was stabbed in the back with a sword, and he screamed shrilly. The goblin swung a hammer at the man. There was blood spattering everywhere. The goblins were brutal. They giggled and tore apart the bloody corpses. One of the monsters turned around with a grin. He saw Hyuk-jin lying on the floor with his eyes closed. The goblin poked him with his club. Seeing no reaction, he turned away and left. The main character opened his eyes. A system window appeared. The effect of the eyes of a cold-blooded observer is active. In training, there are conditionally safe zones, one of which is located inside the bus. A green aura seemed to appear around the vehicle. Hyuk-jin continued to lie on the floor, closing his eyes. He thought that in order to fulfill the condition of the safe zone, he needed to stay where he was. The guy was breathing quietly and calmly. He was afraid that he might move and break the condition, but he was able to calmly endure it. He assumed that it was due to the bonus that the guard gave out, remembering how it happened. There were corpses of people lying next to Hyuk-jin. He didn't know why he was given a bonus, but it would be easier to hold out. He looked at the grinning goblins, knowing that the first attack would last about 10 minutes. For the first 5 minutes they searched and broke into the bus. They didn't have to wait that long. Suddenly one of the goblins turned to him. He extended his hand to the main character's head. The monster lifted him by the hair. The guy tensed. The goblin stuck out its tongue near the guy's head. He licked it slowly, leaving saliva on Hyuk-jin's face. He had to endure because there was not much left. A system window has appeared. The brave Lion King wants to give you a chance. The main character opened his eyes in surprise. He read the information and assumed it was another guard. A system window has appeared. The brave Lion King sends an elixir to increase strength. A bottle of green liquid appeared in the guy's hands. The brave Lion King expected him to be brave. It was a potion whose neck was closed. A system window appeared. A gift from the brave Lion King. Open beta perk. Lasts for 10 minutes and temporarily increases strength by 6. Hyuk-jin reached out to the elixir, thinking that this is the second open beta perk that increases strength. He introduced an abstract player who had been leveled up. The player gains 2 stat points when they level up. This elixir is equal to 3 level ups. The main character was lying on the floor with his stomach down. He looked at the goblins with a weapon in his hand and realized that if he decided to fight the goblins, he would have enough power to win. The brave Lion King expected him to be brave. The guy opened his mouth slightly. There were splashes of someone else's blood on his cheek. He lowered his head, mentally asking the guards if they thought he would just agree. There are a few tens of seconds left until the end of the attack. The goblins were still inside, smiling wickedly. Hyuk-jin looked at them, knowing that he could survive if he didn't do anything reckless. A blue light appeared next to him. A system window appears. The brave Lion King requests a deal from a mid-ranking administrator. The environment around the guy began to distort. He found himself in a blue space next to Xenia. She opened her eyes and said emotionlessly that the brave Lion King's request was to change the conditions of the training area. Hyuk-jin began to get angry, gritting his teeth. He realized that the lion had made a deal with her. Among the many guards, the brave Lion King is notorious. It had a golden emblem with the silhouette of a lion. It imposes reckless courage and a feudal spirit of passion on the player. The players suffered because of him. They were severely wounded in battle. Hyuk-jin considered the lion to be a vile pervert who loves cruelty and suffering of others. The main character frowned. He thought that given the nature of this guard, he would want to remove the safe zone. Xenia closed her eyes and said that the deal was done. The conditional safe zone will be cancelled in 30 seconds. The guy with his head down called out to her. He looked at her and said that if the guardian forcibly changes the training settings, then the player should be compensated accordingly. He asked if she suggested shutting up and being content with the elixir. The white-haired girl's face was emotionless. Hyuk-jin's shirt was stained with blood. He stated that they could not ignore the rules, especially since his life was at stake. He said laws cannot be ignored. Suddenly Xenia's look became shocked. Several system windows appeared. The unknown observer was surprised. The brave Lion King remained silent. Xenia asked if the guy mentioned the laws. Hyuk-jin raised his hand and answered in the affirmative, asking if it was possible to ignore such injustice. He understood her surprise, because the last time they learned about the laws only 7 years after training. Xenia opened her eyes wide and asked how he knew about this. The main character asked with a serious face if it was important, saying that players don't have to explain their game. She looked at him silently. The guy put his hands on his hips and said that they had already spent 10 seconds on this conversation. He frowned and pointed his finger at her, declaring that she wasted his 10 seconds in the safe zone and should make up for it. Hyuk-jin asked if he was right. Xenia looked at him with a cold face and called him by name. She said he was right. An hourglass appeared near her left hand and she announced that according to the laws, the safe zone would be extended by 10 seconds at the end of their conversation. She said changes to training settings will also be accommodated. He received a small jar as well as a sword. Several system windows appeared. Good quality lubricant. high-quality lubricant that can be used for sharpening blades or other purposes. Rusty iron sword. It's better not to expect huge strength. Attack power from 2 to 5. The main character clenched his hand into a fist, asking himself if this is all compensation for changing the scenario. He gradually began to return to the bus, deciding that he would take what he could get. He even had to mention the laws to gain a few tens of seconds. Suddenly the goblins turned away, paying attention to something. A system window appears. The first attack is over. Goblins began to crawl out of the windows. They ran out onto the road and ran away. Hyuk-jin put his hands on his knees and was glad that they were gone. He leaned forward slightly, thinking that their conversation allowed him to wait out the time until the end of the wave and he was able to survive without fighting. The brave Lion King is deeply disappointed. The main character looked away and mentally called him stupid. Suddenly he felt fear as he looked at the corpse. He covered his mouth with his hand, holding back the urge to gag. He tried to calm down and put the backpack on his shoulder, deciding to focus on survival. He approached the validator, realizing that training would be a whole week of hell. Hyuk-jin began to push the doors of the bus open. It was hard. He went outside and there were dead people lying on the road. The guy decided to first find food and water. His main goal was a grocery store, which is located 300 meters away. He studied here for 3 years, so he remembered the local geography perfectly. He began to tighten the straps of his backpack, thinking that he needed to move quickly so as not to find himself in a hopeless situation again. There was devastation all around. Buildings and cars were burning. The man held the wounded body of the girl in his arms, asking for help. Hyuk-jin believed that there must be other survivors here, but he had difficulty finding his way due to the fog. He quickly ran along the sidewalk. The guy stopped next to a gray car. The bus was his only reference point and he should avoid confrontations. He leaned against the car window, realizing that he felt calm despite being surrounded by corpses, guessing it was because of the skill he had gained. Suddenly he saw a hand sticking out from under the car. The main character pursed his lips, thinking that he had almost stepped on a corpse. Suddenly there was a request for help. The guy looked down in surprise. The girl in the sweatshirt extended her hand and asked for salvation. Hyuk-jin was taken aback and took a step back. There was a goblin sticking out on the other side of the car, which seemed strange to the guy, because they were supposed to disappear after the first wave. The monster held his leg in his hands, putting a knife to it. The girl looked at Hyuk-jin and cried, begging him to help her. The guy tensed, clenched his teeth, and looked back at her. She grabbed his shoe. The main character was confused. The girl lowered her head and said exhaustedly that she wanted to see her mother. The main character looked at her and realized that she was still a child. At first he did not consider the situation, but he was still not injured, although the goblin tried to cut him. The monster grinned, preparing to inflict a wound. Hyuk-jin assumed that she also received the open beta bonus. He noticed that the goblin was strangely focused, and the girl was screaming not from pain, but from fear. The guy tensed, squinting his eyes, and assumed that this was a talent he had only heard about. Xenia appeared behind him and said that although this was a goblin child, even he would be difficult to defeat at the first level. The main character lowered his gaze, thinking that if she was telling the truth, then it would be even more impressive. The girl was still lying under the car and sobbing. Hyuk-jin realized that she did not notice due to panic, but such talent in a tank cannot be found just like that. Even the King of Fists is not capable of this with the first level. He looked back at the goblin who was trying to hurt her and wondered if he left her here, other monsters would come and kill her. He needs to make a decision. He opened his inventory and all his things appeared. He is familiar with the training conditions better than many, because he can compare the theory and experience of virtual dungeons. The main character picked up a rusty iron sword. He remembered Xenia's words that it would be difficult for the first level to defeat a child goblin, but this only applies to cases of direct confrontation. He tensed and swung his sword. The guy looked at the goblin's neck, knowing that if he didn't notice him, he wouldn't be able to answer. Hyuk-jin clenched his teeth, concentrating, and aimed at the center of the weak point. He stuck his sword into the goblin's neck, piercing it. The girl looked up. She looked confused. Splashes of blood hit the main character's face. A system window appeared. You killed a goblin child. Experience was gained. He looked at the headless body of the monster. He managed it in one blow. The guy with a calm face looked to the side. He looked at the girl and told her to get up and get ready. The girl knelt down. Hyuk-jin turned away from her and said that if she didn't stay close, he would leave her behind. She quickly got to her feet and said in a trembling voice that she was coming. She was 2 heads shorter than him. The girl ran up to him. The grocery store sign was made in shades of blue, with a banner standing next to it. Hyuk-jin and the girl went inside the store. He told her that this door cannot be opened, no matter what happens. The guy looked at her and asked if she understood. The girl began to tremble and answered in the affirmative. He understood that she was completely overcome by fear, but it would be strange not to be afraid of this hellish training. Behind the main character there were shelves with cigarettes. He told the girl not to open the door, even if she heard someone or something outside. He understood her fear. The girl looked at him in fear and shook. They stood next to the shelves with snacks. A system window appeared above them. The second goblin attack was approaching. Setting up safe zones began. Hyuk-jin asked the girl if she could see it. She grabbed the edge of her sweatshirt and answered in the affirmative. The guy asked what it said. She read what was written there. The main character asked where the safe zones were established. She replied that she was at school, a convenience store, and a hospital. The guy looked at her calmly, thinking that he was not mistaken and that she was truly a player with extraordinary talent. Usually, before the second attack, you can only see the safe zone setting in the grocery store, but the main character heard that players with talent can see the safe zone in the hospital. He looked at the system window and wondered why he was seeing this too. In front of it was a list of safe zones, and it was also written about setting up an additional safe zone. The last one puzzled him. A system window appears. The second goblin attack begins. Hyuk-jin looked back and decided that he needed to make sure they were safe first. He turned to the girl and again reminded her not to open the door, and if she was not sure that she could, she should sit with her back to the door and not even look in that direction. Setting up the safe zone is completed. The main character drew attention to this. He and the girl looked out the window. A primordial fog appeared. Goblins walked the streets. The corpses of people lay on the road in pools of blood. The two survivors tried to defend themselves and drive off the monsters. The goblins attacked them brutally and mercilessly, devouring them alive. Several people noticed the convenience store, which was a safe zone. They knocked on the glass door and asked to be let inside. More and more people approached the store. They began to get angry and shout for the door to be opened for them. Hyuk-jin was holding a sword in his hands. He had no intention of opening it. He looked confused. He still didn't feel anything. However, it still hurt him to watch people rush into the store in search of salvation. A goblin appeared behind one of the survivors. The guy screamed. The monster wounded his hand and blood sprayed out. Soon the entire glass door was covered in blood, but the main character was not going to open it for them. He lowered his head guiltily, thinking that it was impossible to force his way into this safe zone. He lowered his sword, looking at the corpses outside the door. Unfortunately, it is enough to open the door from the inside for the zone to disappear. They would die too if they did this, so all that was left was to watch the others die. The girl hid in a corner, covering her head with her hands and trembling. Hyuk-jin's pupils shrank and he began to get angry, looking at the blood-stained glass. He decided to imprint this moment in his memory, the system that created this situation and the guards who were watching everything as if it were a game. The entire area in front of the store was filled with dead people. The main character bared his teeth furiously and promised that the system and the guards would one day pay for this. 6 hours later, one of the goblins noticed a corpse outside the store. After the second goblin attack, Hyuk-jin and the girl were sitting on the floor near the food shelves. She turned to him and thanked him because she did not have time to do this earlier. The girl smiled softly and said that her name was Seong-hwa and she was 14 years old. She put her hands on her knees and said that she was so glad to see them in the morning. The main character tiredly closed his eyes and said that he helped for a reason and could not guarantee that she would survive what was happening, because she could simply become bait if there was a need. These words hurt Seong-hwa and she grabbed his hand and begged him not to leave her, asking if she had done something wrong. Hyuk-jin looked at her awkwardly, realizing that he had gone a little overboard. He narrowed his eyes slightly and replied that he wanted to say that he could not promise to protect her until the end of the training, because he was not sure that he could even save himself. He said that he would not drive her away until it threatened his own life, after which he suggested that she sleep since she would have to leave tomorrow. Seong-hwa looked at him pitifully and asked if it was true. She asked where they would go next. The guy put his hands on his knees and fell silent. He remembered standing in front of the system window. This system window contained a list of safe places. A new system window has appeared, an additional security zone. Tower D, parking, second floor. He looked at Seong-hwa and replied that they would go to Gwanghwamun. The girl's face was slightly confused. The main character realized that she did not see the additional safe zone. He had also never heard of this before, but he knew that Tower D in Gwanghwamun was the key one for all trading. It was a multi-story building, almost entirely glass. Hyuk-jin put several bottles in his backpack. He put the backpack on his back and tightened the straps. A frightened Seong Hwa was next to him and he began to open the door. Outside, the bodies of victims lay on the road, and there was smoke and fog everywhere. The main character turned to the girl and asked if she was okay. Seong Hwa, barely holding back tears, covered her mouth with her hand and replied that everything was fine. Her face was worried. Hyuk Jin understood that this was too terrible a sight even for his age, and she was trying to pretend that she was fine. The guy looked into the car, where the dead driver lay in the front seat. The main character realized that there were only corpses everywhere. They did not meet any survivors. Seong Hwa walked behind him with a sad face. Hyuk Jin glanced at her. He told her to look carefully at her feet. She raised her head. He pointed down and told her to look at the ground and speak if she saw something jelly-like. The girl pointed to the green slime and asked if that was it. The main character frowned and began to take out his sword. He didn't think they would find the slime so quickly. This is a neutral monster, so its level is not displayed. The slime spread across the asphalt. This is the safest prey that even a child can handle. Hyuk Jin struck the enemy. He killed the slime and gained experience. A system window appears. 3 coins received. The guy looked at the system window and thought that this was his first time using a real sword, but it seemed so familiar. Seong Hwa looked at the road and said that the slime had disappeared. Hyuk Jin walked forward, lowering his sword, and replied that these are the weakest monsters. They will appear on the way. They must be killed. He looked at the girl and again told her to watch her step. She agreed. He didn't understand why it was so easy. The guy only used swords in virtual dungeons. He pursed his lips and lowered his gaze. A system window with information about the sword appeared. He looked at the weapon in his hand and thought that it was as if he had used the sword often, a very familiar feeling. The girl pointed him to the next monster. The main character took out a sword. He killed the slime with 1 blow. This was the 5th. Hyuk Jin thought that Seong Hwa could spot monsters better than him. Several system windows appeared. Level up, current level 2. 2 bonus stat points received. Received 1 bonus point of a random characteristic. A blue aura appeared around Hyuk Jin and he looked at his palm. Seong Hwa looked at him and asked why his body began to glow. He replied that he had leveled up. The girl stood next to the railing. The main character told her that killing monsters raises the level and it becomes stronger. Seong Hwa stated that she will also try to raise the level. Hyuk Jin turned to her, thinking that this was his first time doing this. He rushed forward and killed another slime. For some reason the sword seemed familiar. He cut a small slime in the air. He struck the monster again. An aura appeared around him again. Several system windows appeared. Level up, current level 3. Received 2 bonus stat points. Received 1 bonus point of a random characteristic. He tensed, looking down, and realized that he was raising the level too quickly. He was also annoyed by the system window about a random characteristic point, because it was coming for the 2nd time. Yu Hyun, the King of Fists, who was also called the one who passed the training, mentioned such things in his writings. He had a powerful, muscular back. Bonus points existed, but even he had a hard time getting them. The main character lowered the corners of his lips, thinking that he received points twice, although he is only 3rd level. He remembered again when he received the results of retesting, which showed that he had no talent. Hyuk Jin assumed that the talent panels opened when he returned, but he was sure that it was closed at that time. The guy lowered his sword, suggesting that he might be an early flower, a player who shows maximum growth only at the beginning. The main character thought it was even better. Xenia appeared behind them. He looked at her. The guy lowered his head, looking at the administrator, thinking that he had reached the 3rd level and attracted the attention of several guards. Xenia lowered her head and looked away. Hyuk Jin grabbed his sword again, thinking that if he was truly an early flower, he would have a chance to achieve his goal after training. In front of him were 2 blue slimes. The main character concentrated and swung his sword. In 3 years, a potion for curing illnesses will go on sale, priced at 1 billion won, and it will help cure his mother. Thin lightning bolts appeared from the guy's eyes. He was covered in an aura and cut through the slime. He set himself the goal of surviving and starting to collect money. On the way to Tower D, they continued to kill the slime. Seong Hwa pointed at the monster and the main character cut it. Several system windows appeared. Level up, current level 5. Received 2 bonus stat points. At first he was surprised by the bonus points, but then he discovered another important aspect of the system. The guy turned around and looked at the girl. After the 5th level you can create groups. Hyuk Jin was setting up something in the system window. Seong Hwa asked what it was. Several system windows appeared. An invitation to Seong Hwa to the group was sent. Seong Hwa became part of the group. She will also become stronger. The girl looked at the system window in surprise. Several new system windows have appeared. An unknown observer shows interest. The unknown observer is very interested in you. Seong Hwa quietly thanked the guy. He looked at her. The girl blushed and had tears in her eyes. She said that she would try to help and asked not to abandon her. Hyuk Jin walked closer to her, looking at her. He thought that she was worrying about this again. Of course, he feels sorry for her, but he is already busy taking care of himself. The main character closed his eyes and sighed, telling her to show it with action, not words. Even though he grows faster and gets extra points, that monster is waiting for them in Bash D. It was a large orc with a necklace around his neck. The main character understood that he would not be able to protect Seong Hwa in a fight with him. He thought that protecting someone on level 5 even sounded funny. He looked at the bus stop sign. He and the girl walked along the sidewalk together. Suddenly Seong Hwa noticed someone and called out to the guy. In the distance, next to the cars, a white fox was walking. The beast had yellow eyes. It was a third-level city fox. The girl looked at her system window in surprise. The main character thought that he looked like a neutral monster, but he had a passive ability that provokes surrounding monsters to attack. He decided that it was better to quietly bypass him. The girl made an alarmed face, asking what kind of provocation. Suddenly strange sounds were heard. Hyuk Jin and Seong Hwa began to look around. Several more foxes appeared, growling aggressively. Many animals surrounded the frightened girl. They attacked her, and the main character realized that this was aggression in the area. The foxes dug their fangs into her skin. The girl cried and screamed. The guy tensed up and took out his sword. He realized that she was taking almost no damage, but the foxes would only become more numerous. He decided to aim for their neck and kill them quickly. In a short period of time, he attacked several opponents at once. System windows appeared indicating that 4 city foxes had been killed. Seong Hwa looked very scared and was trying to catch her breath. A blue aura appeared around the main character. He asked her if she was injured. He raised his level to 8. Translucent Senia appeared behind him and asked him what his level was. Hyuk Jin wiped the sweat from his face, realizing that the administrators could observe the players and remain invisible. He lowered his sword and replied that he was level 8. Senia asked if it was true and he told her to scan and find out. The administrator tried not to show any surprise and said that he was not lying. Several system windows have appeared. An unknown observer is surprised by your growth rate. Several anonymous guards are impressed. The main character looked at her slightly indifferently, thinking that the speed was really high and he himself considered it strange. A status window appears. Name, Hyuk Jin, player. Level 8, no title. Stamina 14, Strength 14, Intelligence 14, Spirit 13 plus 30, Agility 14, Perception 14. Bonus points 0, random points 4, unallocated points 4. The guy thought that this is not how the 8th level stats should look. His height is unusual, but it's a good opportunity. He looked at Seong Hwa and called her name. He pointed to a tall modern building and said that they were going to that building and he was going to the D Tower dungeon. He said that he will explain the plan inside. If she doesn't listen, she will die. The girl was taken aback and her cheeks turned red. He asked her not to be afraid, because all she had to do was follow his commands to survive. They walked forward together. Senia stood behind. Many system windows appeared that the city foxes were killed and experience was gained. Their corpses lay on the sidewalk. Hyuk Jin leaned on his sword. Seong Hwa had iron gloves on his hands. A status window appeared with the guy's characteristics. He gave the girl old iron gloves that they received during the hunt. The guy wiped the sweat from his face, thinking that the preparation was complete. All that was left was to follow the plan. He invited the girl to go inside. She looked at him slightly surprised and agreed. A system window appeared near the building. A training dungeon. Required level to enter Tower D, 5. The entrance to the building was closed by a blue wall. A system window appeared in front of Hyuk Jin. Training dungeon. Do you want to enter Tower D? He agreed by clicking the yes button. Seong Hwa hugged the guy's arm and they went inside together. A system window appeared. You entered the training dungeon. Bathhouse D. There were goblins sitting inside and foxes walking around. As soon as the goblins noticed them, they began to attack. The main character turned to Seong Hwa and asked if she remembered what to do. She clenched her hands into fists and answered in the affirmative. A system window appears. The group with the player Seong Hwa has been disbanded. Hyuk-jin said that as planned, they will start with the goblins. The girl agreed and ran forward. Several goblins attacked her at once. She punched her opponent in the face. The main character thought that unlike high-level dungeons, where every monster is aggressive, in Tower D there are aggressive goblins and neutral city foxes. The goblin's face looked tense and slightly frightened. Seong Hwa hit another enemy in the face. Hyuk-jin thought that if only goblins were attacked, then the foxes would not attack first. He watched the girl beat up her enemies and wondered if she was a genius, because she was even better at it than he thought. The beaten goblin fell to the floor. The other monster became afraid as Seong Hwa looked at him. Hyuk-jin noticed that the goblin attacks did not harm her at all, and she exceeded all expectations. There were many killed opponents next to the girl. She looked tired. The main character praised her and suggested she rest. He walked forward, holding his sword and backpack, thinking that a mini-boss would appear soon. He comes when all the goblins and foxes on the first floor have been killed. The guy put his backpack on the floor and asked Seong Hwa if she had rested and told her to finish off the others. The girl clenched her hands into fists and agreed. He shouted to her to run here when he was done. She answered in the affirmative, swinging at the fox. She hit the beast on the head, causing it to bleed from its mouth. Hyuk-jin carefully watched her movements, thinking that there was not much left. Suddenly something made him taken aback and surprised. A system window appears, the pause effect is activated. It became quiet around, all movements stopped. Several system windows have appeared. An unknown observer shows deep curiosity. The brave Lion King is interested again. The anonymous guards begin to scream. The administrator turned to Hyuk-jin. He gritted his teeth and turned around, thinking that the pause temporarily stopped all activities in a particular area. Senia approached him and asked if he was crazy. Pause is an item effect that can be used by an administrator. The main character heard that the item was very expensive, and she used it on him. The guy bared his teeth a little hostilely and asked what she was talking about. Senia, with an emotionless face, said that he acted as if he knew what awaited him, and asked if this was part of his plans. Hyuk-jin looked at her white wings and said that even if he enters, she shouldn't care. She asked why to act so unreasonably. Senia closed her eyes and said that the mini-boss he was trying to summon was a level 13 goblin soldier. He was larger and stronger than the other goblins, and had 2 sticks on his back. Senia added that since he is a mini-boss and has increased stats, he is not an opponent that he can defeat at his level, and not with one person. Hyuk-jin calmly looked to the side. Seong Hwa froze next to him. The administrator asked him why he would start a battle that he could not win. The main character silently turned to her. He told her that it sounded like she didn't want him dead. Senia silently lowered her gaze. The administrator with an indifferent face replied that she did not understand what he was talking about. Hyuk-jin was sure that she was trying to lie. He narrowed his eyes. He realized that he had become someone who attracted a lot of attention. He thought about Senia's words that he is a player who seems to know the future. The guy remembered how he dealt with the goblins. He wielded his sword deftly. Hyuk-jin realized that he had in fact become a rare figure who could put on a show and attract the attention of more guards. He concluded that his survival was beneficial to her, especially since he had not heard from her in the future. The main character looked at the administrator hovering above the floor. He grinned and sighed, saying that she couldn't even come up with an excuse. He stated that Senia does not know how to communicate at all. These words made her take aback. Her gaze became confused. Hyuk-jin thought she was such a bad administrator that she would be destroyed before she gained any fame. Senia fluttered her wings and asked if this was an insult. The main character took the sword in his hands and replied that he was simply telling the truth. She did not know how to take advantage of the situation. He narrowed his eyes and told her that if she wanted to better entertain the guards, then after a pause she should say that Hyuk-jin could not defeat the goblin soldier, but he would survive and bring victory. Senia looked at him in disbelief and asked if the two of them would go against the goblin soldier. A soft smile appeared on the guy's face. He turned to the angelic girl and said that the guards would go crazy if they saw the 8th level defeat the boss, and she would immediately become a competent mid-rank administrator. He lowered the corners of his lips and began to offer something in return. The main character smiled again, raising his hand and offering a deal if he would help her little show. Yellow lightning appeared near Senia's hands. She said that his arrogance was too great. She pointed her hand at him with magic and declared that her patience was not unlimited. Hyuk-jin frowned slightly and replied that she would have killed him long ago if she wanted to. The inside of the tower looked like a multi-story complex with escalators. The main character asked the administrator if she would lose too much now after using the pause, saying that the deal with him would only benefit. The girl frowned and asked in disbelief what kind of deal this was. Hyuk Jin pursed his lips and narrowed his eyes. Seong Hwa killed another city fox. Her current level is 7. The dead fox fell to the floor. The girl turned to the main character and shouted that she had killed everyone. He called her over. She ran up to the guy. He had a tense expression on his face. Several system windows appeared. All the monsters on the floor were destroyed. Completed spawns for the mini-boss, Goblin Soldier. Large green legs appeared, wrapped in bandages. It was a goblin soldier. He had 2 spears in his hands. An ordinary goblin stood nearby. A system window appears. A boss monster zone is being created. Hyuk Jin hugged Seong Hwa. They were hiding behind the wall and he asked her to duck down. He gritted his teeth, tensed, and realized that the goblin soldier was even larger in person. The mini-boss began to grin and growl in hostility. The goblin soldier swung his spear. He threw it forward with a war cry. The main character was holding Seong Hwa close to him. He had a sword in his hands. The spear stuck into the ATM next to them. The girl screamed in fear. He knew that the most effective way to defeat a goblin soldier was to avoid the most dangerous skill, the spear throw. He looked at the protruding tip and decided that they would hide behind the ATM for now. Hyuk Jin stood up and called Seong Hwa with him. They both stood up and the main character said it was time to start. The girl agreed with him. A system window appears. Seong Hwa has joined the group. Xenia appeared behind Hyuk Jin. He told her to watch carefully as a weak level 8 player defeats the mini-boss. He tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword. He walked straight towards the aggressive goblin soldier. The monster pointed its spear at him and growled. The main character began to draw his sword from its sheath, thinking that the mini-boss was much more frightening than the others. When he makes his deadly spear throw, he will immediately rush at the survivors. The goblin soldier ran towards him, screaming loudly. Hyuk Jin carefully watched his actions, realizing that there were 2 options for attack, a simple thrust or something else. He noticed the monster begin to raise its spear. At that moment the guy was taken aback and realized that it would be a swing. The goblin struck, but the main character managed to dodge. At this time, he swung his sword back. Hyuk Jin attacked him. He was able to wound the goblin in the body. The monster bared its teeth with displeasure and turned to the guy. The main character realized that he had inflicted a light cut and, as expected, it would not cause much damage. The goblin soldier prepared to attack again, and the guy knew from his movements that he would make a puncture. Hyuk Jin was able to block the attack with his sword, thinking that the monster was very fast. He slid back a little, but still managed to stay in place. The main character swung his sword, realizing that he could predict the movements. The monster opened its mouth and let out a questioning cry. Hyuk Jin decided to use all his strength to kill him. He struck the goblin's body and blood sprayed out. Seong Hwa pursed her lips, frowning, and thought about provocation. Aggressive goblins and foxes gathered around her. The city fox bit into her neck and she clenched her teeth. The goblin struck her body. The girl thought that she needed to stick to the plan that Hyuk Jin spoke about. She closed one eye, thinking that she didn't want him to ever leave her. A system window appeared. Channel number 19207 is filled with a large number of anonymous guards. Xenia clenched her hands into fists and said in surprise that there were so many of them. The guards were asking if he was definitely level 8, and if he was actually trying to defeat the mini-boss of the tutorial. Xenia kept an emotionless face. She answered in the affirmative and said that the player was level 8, and she seemed to believe it herself. The guards said that the movements did not resemble those of a level 8 person, suggesting that he was hiding something. Hyuk Jin dealt another blow to the mini-boss. The administrator looked at him and mentally agreed with the guards that his movements were different from ordinary players. However, she believed that with such progress, he would not be able to win. There were only shallow cuts on the goblin soldier's body, and the main character was breathing heavily. Xenia knew that weak attacks would not kill the mini-boss, but would exhaust the player. The goblin bared its teeth and squealed, tightening its grip on the spear. Hyuk Jin looked tired, beads of sweat running down his face. The mini-boss with a hostile face swung again. The main character turned around and shouted loudly that the time had come. He ordered Seong Hwa to kill. At this time, the girl suffered attacks from foxes and goblins. As soon as she heard the guy's order, she swung her fist. She delivered a strong blow to the goblin's jaw, gaining experience. She continued killing monsters and hit the city fox. Xenia looked at him with interest, saying that this cannot be. A yellow light appeared around the main character. His level increased to 9. He dealt another blow to the monster. Blood spattered on his face and he realized that he had recovered. A system window has appeared. The durability of the rusty iron sword is decreasing. Hyuk Jin thought that leveling up not only gives stat points, but also restores health, removing all negative status effects. He can use this trick due to the low level of the zone and the rapid growth of his own levels. The guy took a step back, maintaining his concentration. He looked at Seong Hwa and shouted to her to keep her enemies at a distance and be ready. She agreed. He deftly dodged the spear attack while the girl ran in the other direction. The main character thought that if Seong Hwa shared his experience while the goblin was distracted by him, he would be able to become stronger, heal his wounds and replenish his stamina. The guy clenched his teeth, deflecting the attack, realizing that then the chance would definitely appear. This was a chance to exploit the goblin's weakness, a strike to the back of the neck. The goblin soldier bared his teeth, veins popping out on his head. Hyuk Jin opened the status window, thinking about the current amount of experience. The experience bar was almost full. While Seong Hwa killed one goblin after another, the experience accumulated. The guy realized that there was one more concept of the level left. The mini-boss shouted aggressively, swinging again. The main character gritted his teeth, looking at him. He realized that this attack would have to be taken. The spear hit his shoulder. The experience bar began to fill. Hyuk Jin knelt down on one knee, his current level rising to 10. A glint appeared in his eyes as he swung his sword. He began to gradually rise, the floor cracking under his foot. In an instant, he hit the back of the goblin soldier's head, blood sprayed out. A system window has appeared. The durability of the rusty iron sword is decreasing. Hyuk Jin froze in mid-air for a second as the goblin looked at him. The mini-boss turned around, looking at his wound. The main character swung his sword powerfully, shouting warlikely. He plunged the tip of his sword into the back of the monster's neck. A system window appears. The rusty iron sword is broken. The guy unclenched his hand, letting go of the sword. The sword stuck into the back of the monster's head began to disappear. The goblin screamed furiously in pain. Several system windows appeared. Congratulations, you have killed the mini-boss, the goblin soldier. Hyuk Jin looked to the side, breathing heavily, with small abrasions on his face. A system window appeared. Level limit for training zone 10. Seong Hwa ran up to the guy, calling him. Several system windows have appeared. The recommended number of players for a mini-boss raid is 5. The system evaluates your victory as a single playthrough. The training zone level limit has been removed. Leveling up is possible again. The girl rushed into Hyuk Jin's arms. He thought that he hugged her mechanically, but she also tried hard. A system window appears. You have met one of the hidden figure conditions. The main character noticed this and wondered if there was a hidden boss here. But he doesn't know what the opening conditions are. For him this is just an extra hassle. Wangwomon District. Clouds floated in the sky above modern buildings. Aggressive city foxes roamed the streets. The guy in the jacket swung his fist, shouting loudly. He dealt a crushing blow to the fox, causing him to die immediately. The guy looked at his fist while the other survivors were surprised. The guy with blue hair and the girl with purple hair praised the guy. Someone said that it is already clear that Yu Hyun is the strongest in the training area. Yu Hyun became embarrassed and put his hand behind his head, saying that he was not that strong. Suddenly he noticed Hyuk Jin and Seong Hwa in the distance, who were dealing with a fox. Yu Hyun realized that these were other survivors. The main character pulled out his sword and told the girl to move on. Yu Hyun waved and called out to them. Hyuk Jin and Seong Hwa turned to them, surprised. The main character remembered the killed mini-boss, and the thought couldn't get out of his head about whether he really had no talent. He believed that this couldn't be the case considering that he had defeated the mini-boss. He and Seong Hwa looked at the goblin soldier's corpse. He believed that knowledge of certain future events was not a guarantee that the dungeon would be easy. Hyuk Jin looked down, trying to catch his breath. A system window has appeared. An unknown observer is amazed by your concentration. Now the main character didn't really understand what his limits were. He looked at the bloody body of the monster. The bandages on the goblin's legs were also covered in blood. The main character thought that he also received attention from this guard. A system window appears. A woman with scales shows interest. A Libra woman is a guardian whose character is close to absolute goodness. A woman in a robe stood against the backdrop of golden scales, her face covered with a hood. She extended her hand to the back of the player's head. Unlike the Lion King, she puts the safety and well-being of the players first and generously sponsors them. Hyuk Jin thought that she always provides reasonable support and compensation. She is a guardian who has earned the love of many players. The guy lowered his gaze in confusion, not understanding why she showed interest in him. He opened his mouth and looked in the other direction. He looked at the puzzled Seong Hwa and suggested that traveling with her looked like rescuing an abandoned child. Xenia shined the light on the mini-boss's corpse. She looked at the power in her hand and called out to Hyuk Jin. She gave him a reward for his victory. It was a sword. A system window appeared, an iron sword of normal quality, normal durability, and normal strength. Attack power from 4 to 12. The main character thought that this sword was 2 times better than the rusty one. Seong Hwa came up behind him and asked where they were going now. He turned to the girl and replied that they would go to Cheongyecheon and try to kill as many city wolves as they could there. The girl was surprised and asked if he was talking about wolves and not foxes. He said that ordinary wolves are level 7 and the leader is level 9. The city wolf had white fur and red eyes. The main character said that they could deal with them. Seong Hwa asked him how he knew so much, to which Hyuk Jin replied that he heard from someone before meeting her. Xenia gave him a suspicious look, but said nothing. Initially, the guy planned to stay in the safe zone before the King of Fists attacked the second floor of Tower D. He put the backpack on his back and walked with the girl towards the exit. Completing this dungeon affects the entire training area. They only cleared the first floor. On the first floor of Tower D, large-scale attacks in the training area, such as a goblin attack, do not occur during a raid. Information about the second floor is not yet available. Hyuk Jin thought that thanks to this, all the survivors would be able to survive until the end of the training, as long as they remained in the safe zones. A blue portal appeared near the tower doors. The guy's new goal goes beyond simple survival. He and Seong Hwa approached the portal, the main character thinking that he definitely has talent. So raising money for the family does not seem so out of reach. A system window has appeared. Do you want to leave the dungeon? Hyuk Jin put on a serious expression and thought that whether it was a talent from his training or one that had always been with him, he would take advantage of every opportunity. Clouds floated over the empty buildings. Yu Hyan ran up to the heroes and asked if they were able to survive. They looked at him in surprise. Hyuk Jin recognized him immediately, even though it was the first time they had met in person. The King of Fists, Yu Hyan, had short hair and gray eyes. Later he will be in the top 8 famous players in Korea. Now he looks a little simpler. The main character replied that they were able to survive. Yu Hyan smiled softly and said that it must have been hard for them. Hyuk Jin paid attention to the people next to him and was surprised that he saved so many people. After all, the title of being trained was given to him for a reason. Yu Hyan raised his hand and invited them to join their group. He believed that as one group they would have a better chance. The guy extended his hand to the main character, waiting for his answer. Hyuk Jin looked at him silently. He refused, surprising Yu Hyan and his group. The main character kept a calm face. He said that it was enough to hold out for 7 days. They could handle it together. Yu Hyan smiled awkwardly, rubbing the back of his head, and wished them luck. Hyuk Jin smiled and wished him luck in return. The other survivors considered him arrogant, so he did not see Yu Hyan's strength, and surviving with them would be much easier. The main character began to leave, but finally decided to give one piece of advice. He said that if he encounters a monster that seems too strong, he should aim for his left eye, after which he pointed to his left eye. Yu Hyan was taken aback at first, but then thanked him. Hyuk Jin turned away and said that they would go. Cheongyecheon, a river flowed near a park with trees. Seong Hwa looked at the guy and asked if those people could handle it. Hyuk Jin walked slightly behind. He replied that they would most likely manage, because the guy seemed strong. He added that they would take better care of themselves. The main character looked at the flowers near the river and thought that even though he said this, they would face problems. According to the memoirs of the King of Fists, Yu Hyan and about 10 survivors will go to the dungeon of Tower D. He imagined the tower in gray colors. The guy visualized their raid into the dungeon. They will deal with the first floor, try to capture the second, but an unexpected enemy will appear and kill most of the group. By the end of the battle, only Yu Hyan will remain alive. His entire group was dead, their corpses were everywhere. Yu Hyan will receive the title of trained, because he will be the first person to clear the dungeon of Tower D. He wept bitterly, looking at the corpses of his comrades. In his memoirs, the attempt to clear the second floor was the biggest mistake of his life. Hyuk Jin understood that this time everything could turn out differently, but he could not join them, it was too dangerous. While they were walking through the park, Seong Hwa called out to him. She pointed forward with a worried face and said that there were monsters there. He praised her for her vigilance and offered to deal with them. Several white wolves roamed the lawn. As soon as the animals noticed the guy and girl, they immediately growled. Seong Hwa swung her bat and Hyuk Jin began to draw his sword. The girl clenched her teeth and struck the wolf. The main character was able to kill several enemies at once with one swing of his sword. His goal is not to complete the training dungeon. The rest of the city wolves began to bark and growl aggressively at them. Hyuk Jin looked focused as he pulled his sword back. He believed that it was necessary to take advantage of the removal of the level limit and raise the level above 10. He deftly attacked 2 monsters at once. The tip of the bat was pressed against the opponent's face. A system window appears. You killed the city wolf. Experience gained. Seong Hwa held a bloody bat in her hands, thinking that against wolves this weapon was much better than iron fists. She was glad she listened to Hyuk Jin and took the bat. The girl turned around and looked in surprise. Several system windows appeared. Level up. Congratulations, you are the first to reach level 11. Hyuk Jin looked into the distance while Seong Hwa watched him. He understood that this was expected because it would be difficult for others to reach even the 10th level. Several system windows have appeared. You receive a title for your achievements. Title: Discoverer. The main character was slightly taken aback and surprised by this. A new system window has appeared. Discoverer. An honorary title given to the pioneer of new territories. Experience plus 20% does not conflict with other titles. The guy was shocked by these bonuses. He looked at the system window with confusion, thinking that he had never heard of such a title and did not know that it was possible to obtain more than just the title of having completed training. Hyuk Jin understood that this made sense. Last time no one removed the level cap. He looked to the side, introducing himself, and realized that no one had fulfilled the conditions, so they could not even know about it. They approached the blue path. Seong Hwa asked if everything was okay, and the main character suggested moving on. They walked across a bridge over a small river. Senia watched them from above without saying anything. Part of her face was covered by her bangs, and she told the guards that she was thinking about it too. The administrator looked down with suspicion and said that everything needed to be checked. Safe zone in the hospital. Senia was already inside. She frowned. Hyuk Jin pointed in the direction and told Seong Hwa to go there. The main character turned around and looked at Senia, who was trembling, realizing that she was furious. Yesterday she asked him if he received the title. Hyuk Jin turned to her, mentally asking if she was talking about the Discoverer. He placed the sword on his shoulder and replied that he had received it. Senia asked what title he received. The main character sighed, starting to say something. He replied that he was not going to tell, which is why the administrator was taken aback. The guy knew that the guards couldn't find out the players' titles until they said so they continued to put pressure on Senia. There were many system windows around her. Hyuk Jin glanced at her, knowing that she must be having a hard time, but he had no reason to talk and it was better to leave the guards interested. Seong Hwa asked him if they would go to Chungyecheon today. He answered in the affirmative and said that they would also go there tomorrow. There was a lot of blood spattered on the signpost. At the same time, next to Gwangwon, a group of survivors stood near a tall building. Yu Hyan announced that he had something to tell them. People listened carefully to his words that there was a dungeon nearby, and they did not know what danger might lurk inside. Yu Hyan looked confident as he shouted that after the world changed, risk became a greater reward. He said that if they agreed, they could go together. The survivors looked at him in slight amazement. The man with the beard smiled and told him that he would go with him, because he had helped him a lot and he should take advantage of the opportunity. The guy with wavy hair smiled and said that together it would be better. Everyone shouted that they would go together. A gray building towered above them, with trees growing nearby. Yu Hyan raised his fist in the air and said that they would start tomorrow and suggested preparing for the raid. Chungyecheon, the park was empty and a monster began to appear on the sidewalk. The wolves appeared on the path one by one. They began to become aggressive and bark, growling in hostility. Hyuk Jin was focused and held his sword with both hands. The guy killed 2 city wolves in one move. Seong Hwa lowered her bat and said that they were getting faster. The main character replied that it was because it was repeated many times. They have been hunting wolves for the 2nd day. Hyuk Jin did not even notice how he got level 12. Now they are killing wolves faster than they appear. He looked forward and stretched his wrist. They received many items and coins, including a mutant wolf fang. They currently had 12 coins. Seong Hwa looked to the other side and saw a wolf there, which she reported. Hyuk Jin crossed the bridge and began to draw his sword, wondering if this was the last wolf. He hit the monster on the back of the head with his sword. The wolf fell onto the stairs and his body began to disappear. Suddenly, the main character felt something was wrong. A red notification popped up in front of him. Inscription on the system window. All conditions for the hidden figure are met. Hyuk Jin gritted his teeth and cursed. He was tense. A system window appears. Knowledge about the hidden figure has been acquired. Level limit passed. 12 out of 12. 500 city wolves killed. The main character tried to avoid any dangers, but he failed. A red system window appears. The Wolf King, a lycanthrope, appears. A black spot appeared in the air, surrounded by red light. Hyuk-jin was taken aback and tensed. He looked scared. He turned to Seong Hwa in alarm and ordered her to run. She obeyed him. They hurriedly ran away from the portal. The girl asked what it was. The main character replied that there was no time to explain. They ran out onto the road and turned around. A ferocious werewolf emerged from the black portal. Hyuk-jin mentally cursed. The system window reported that a lycanthrope had appeared. He stood on the road and began to howl loudly. A system window has appeared. A howl effect has been applied to the body. Seong Hwa began to sweat and fell to her knees, moaning in pain. She began to experience paralysis. She fell hard on her stomach onto the road, screaming. The main character called out to her. She raised her head and began talking about her body. The guy loudly ordered her to hide behind the car. She looked at him and asked what he would do. Hyuk-jin did not answer anything. He just said to do it quickly. The girl was confused. The main character clenched his teeth and frowned. He had guessed that there might be a hidden figure in the training, but he never thought that he would meet a lycanthrope. A huge werewolf aggressively walked towards him. The guy understood that if we compare only physical abilities, he is stronger than the monster on the second floor. Hyuk-jin didn't see his level because his own is too low. The lycanthrope grinned, his eyes glowing ominously. The guy looked at him. There was a slight fog around. He assumed that the monster was level 20 to 25 and was not the kind of enemy that should appear in the tutorial. He didn't know what to do now. The werewolf lowered his front paws onto the asphalt. He began to grin and growl hostilely again. Hyuk-jin realized that their difference in levels was too great. His hand gripped his sword tightly. Suddenly he relaxed his palm, dropping the weapon. Saliva flowed from the wolf's mouth onto the road. The guy realized that it was too late to run. Hyuk-jin started drinking the green elixir, deciding that he would take a chance. Several system windows appeared. A large elixir of power was used. Strength temporarily increases by 6. A blue aura appeared around the guy. He threw away the empty elixir bottle. He said that he would have to use the strategy of the great adventurer Jackson. The werewolf's eyes began to glow brightly. Hyuk-jin gritted his teeth and ordered him to attack. The lycanthrope lunged forward and attacked him. The monster swung its paw and screamed loudly. He quickly ran towards the guy, who remained in place. Seong Hwa hid behind the car and looked out. She didn't know if Hyuk-jin could handle it. Saliva flowed from the werewolf's mouth. He growled aggressively, and his level was still unknown. Seong Hwa was taken aback and gritted her teeth, realizing that he was definitely different from the monsters they were hunting. The main character was still standing in place. He looked tense. Seong Hwa didn't understand what he was going to do. There were only a few meters between the lycanthrope and the guy. Sweat was dripping down the guy's face as he thought that the lack of level display meant that he couldn't beat him. This is exactly what the system wants to say. Hyuk-jin introduced the werewolf even more. He flexed his fingers, realizing that there were about 10 levels between them. He looked at the monster, realizing that it was impossible to destroy it in battle. He remembered the video he watched in a past life. The man said that they most likely would not encounter anything like this at a low level. It was a lecture by the great adventurer Jackson about werewolves. He said that the monster is large and strong, but at the same time fast, and the best thing that players at their level can do is not to approach or run away. Jackson raised his index finger and said that if a fight was inevitable, there was only one solution. Hyuk-jin at that moment was sitting in his apartment and listening to a method that was worth trying even at the risk of his life. At the moment, the main character opened his inventory and took out good quality lubricant. He knew that the lycanthrope's first attack was to jump, which the monster did. The werewolf closed its mouth, the fur on its neck standing on end. He landed crushingly, but Hyuk-jin managed to run to the side. The guy knew that after landing there would be an almost instant attack. He opened a bottle of lubricant. The lycanthrope's muscles tensed and he took a step back. The main character took aim at the point where a shadow appears under the monster's feet. He poured yellow grease into the area. The liquid ended up under the werewolf's foot. His gaze became confused and he growled questioningly. Hyuk-jin attacked him and pushed him in the stomach. He punched him in the torso. The guy gained more strength thanks to the elixir. The lycanthrope fell backwards and began to fall into the river. Jackson showed hand gestures in the video and said to use the size of the monster against him. He schematically showed the tactics and said to throw him into the water by any means and efforts. The werewolf fell into the water. Splashes of water rose into the air. The main character got down on one knee and tried to catch his breath. Seong Hwa was sitting behind him. The lycanthrope floundered in the river, barking pitifully. Red lightning appeared around him, and he noticeably shrunk. The girl was taken aback and noticed changes in the monster's body. She asked what happened. Hyuk-jin put his palm on his knee and replied that water always affects them in this way. Now the strength is less. He looks like a simple wolf. Seong-hwa looked after him and asked if he had studied any martial arts. The guy replied that he did not have time for this, only preparing for the exam. The girl started swinging her fists joyfully and said that he fought as if he had stepped out of a movie. Hyuk-jin smiled awkwardly and thought that if he were really strong in battles, he would do without tricks. He went down into the river to the growling werewolf. The guy stuck the sword right into his chest. The monster screamed. The lycanthrope was completely hit by the sword. A system window appeared. You killed the lycanthrope. The main character pulled out his sword, thinking that it turned out to be easier to figure out than he expected. The system window appeared. Level up, current level, 13. The guy looked back and thought that the monster was so strong that he immediately increased the level. He looked down in surprise, because his level had increased to 15. Several system windows appeared. You defeated a hidden figure, a lycanthrope. Received the title of Excellent Hunter. Hyuk-jin was taken aback. His mouth slightly opened. He did not expect to receive the title in 3 levels in a row. Many system windows have appeared. An unknown observer is impressed by your strategy and wants to sponsor. 12 O coins received. The Libra woman admires your camaraderie and wants to sponsor her. Received 700 coins. The brave Lion King mocks your dirty methods. The lycanthrope's body began to disappear. Hyuk-jin sighed tiredly. He began to emerge from the river, his boots and pants soaked through. He wondered if the training would work if he reached level 15. Seong-hwa ran up to the guy. He called Senia. She appeared right in front of him. The main character said that it was as if she had been waiting for this. The receptionist looked at him and said that she had confirmed that he was level 15, so she would begin explaining the item store. Seong-hwa and Hyuk-jin looked at her. The guy doubted whether it would be available. But apparently there is no restriction on training, only level. Senia said that in the item store you can spend coins to buy special things. A system window appeared in front of the guy. The administrator noted that since it is located in the training zone, the store will also be set for training. So far there were 4 items available, 3 weak potions and a scroll of return to a low-level safe zone. Hyuk-jin examined the objects with his eyes, thinking that even 4 would be enough. He put his fist to his chin and thought that he had 7942 coins and could stock up on various potions. Senia looked at him silently. She got his attention and said she had a question. She asked if he had a real name. Hyuk-jin looked at her slightly surprised, lost in thought. He made an indifferent face and asked why he should answer. Senia began to tremble and turned away from him, saying that she was not curious. She asked if he would check for another award and title. The main character grinned and opened the system window, saying that he would look around the store and then check it personally, but she didn't need to know. He exhaled, knowing that she wanted him to open the status window and show her, but it was better to keep the mystical atmosphere. Senia started to get irritated. A system window appeared, Excellent Hunter, a special title that is only given in the training area. Apply to non-intelligent living organisms recognized by the system. Additional damage increased by 20%. Movement speed increased by 10%. Hunter strike skill, small chance to ignore special attributes of the target being attacked. Hyuk-jin understood that most low-level monsters were unreasonable. This skill would be very useful. He relaxed his eyelids, saying nothing. Suddenly he turned to Seong-hwa and told her to get ready to leave. The girl looked at him in surprise and asked where they would go. The main character stood next to her and replied that they would go to the dungeon of Tower D, 2nd floor. She asked if he was talking about the training dungeon where they defeated the goblin. He imagined a tower room with a shabby floor in his head and answered in the affirmative. Seong-hwa recalled that he talked about the danger on the 2nd floor. The guy looked at her and said that there was a monster there that was much stronger than the goblin soldier. A man with a deep wound on his back was hanging from a balcony inside the tower. There were many corpses of people around. Only Yu Hyan was alive. His face was wounded. He was breathing heavily, not understanding where this monster came from. In front of him was a huge, strong ogre. He didn't know how they were supposed to defeat him. The monster had sharp fangs and its eyes sparkled. The ogre clenched his hands into fists and stood in a fighting pose. Yu Hyan was trembling as he prepared to fend off his attacks, but knowing that it would all be over if he fell. He swung his fist powerfully, deciding to attack the ogre once more. He struck the monster's head and a bright flash appeared. The ogre held his breath and prepared to attack. He hit Yu Hyan directly in the chest with his fist. The guy felt that the bone in his shoulder had cracked. He gritted his teeth in pain, his pupils constricted. Yu Hyan grabbed his shoulder, looking at the ogre, and did not understand how he did not receive damage after so many attacks. He felt like he was fighting a wall. He clenched his hands into fists again, knowing that they would definitely die if he didn't do anything, and wondered if he was truly impossible to defeat. Yu Hyan began to think about a way out of this situation. He remembered how Hyuk Jin gave him some advice when they met. The main character pointed to his eye and said that if he meets a monster that seems too strong, he should aim for his left eye. Yu Hyan opened his eyes wide, thinking that he was saying something like that. He raised his head and saw that the ogre had swung again. The guy made a dive under his hand. Suddenly he saw a monster's fist in front of him. The ogre dealt a powerful blow, causing Yu Hyan's nose to bleed. The guy was thrown back due to the force of the attack. He began to cough up blood sharply. He looked at the huge monster, realizing that he could not win. A system window appeared. A new player entered. The monster turned its head and looked at him. Yu Hyan lowered his head, blood flowing from his nose. A system window appears. You have entered the boss zone. The main character took a step forward. Hyuk Jin came to the dungeon with Seong Hwa. Several system windows have appeared. There is no limit on the number of players. Escape from the boss area is possible within the next 10 seconds. Hyuk Jin looked around the battlefield and said that now he understands what happened. The monster looked at them. He was a magic troll, and his level was unknown. One of the survivors lay on the floor and moaned in pain, begging for help. Yu Hyan sat on the floor and lowered his head. The survivor asked if someone had come. The girl looked around in horror. Hyuk Jin thought that there were many serious injuries, but they were still alive, and Yu Hyan was possibly unconscious. He opened his inventory and took out several weak healing potions. The man looked at them and told them to run. His face was covered in bruises, and he said that in 10 seconds they would not be able to escape and the monster would kill them if they stayed. He ordered them to quickly escape from the dungeon. The main character looked at him. He poured several bottles of potions into Seong Hwa's hands and told her to distribute them among the people and give them to Yu Hyan too. A system window appears. A weak healing potion is installed in the slot. The girl looked intensely at Hyuk Jin. He took out his weapon and said that while he was fighting, let her tell the others to stay put and not move. The wounded man again shouted at them to leave and save themselves. He shouted that they would die if they stayed here. The main character approached the magic troll. A bead of sweat appeared on his face as he thought that no one knew the boss of the second floor of Tower D better than him. He looked at it. His name was in the red system window, like a lycanthrope. The guy understood that it would be difficult to defeat him, because they are famous for their vitality and endurance. There were several cuts on the troll's body, and swords and spears had been stuck into it. The magic troll has boss buffs and resistance to physical attacks. Hyuk Jin realized that he received almost no damage from melee attacks. This was a serious opponent for Yu Hyan. Yu Hyan himself continues to sit on the floor. The monster growled loudly and raised its fist. The man screamed desperately, trying to dissuade him. The magic troll struck, but hit the floor. This puzzled him, and he looked down in confusion. The protagonist knew that in exchange for enormous power, his attacks became slow. Hyuk Jin swung his sword, dodging the attack. The troll turned its head and squealed loudly from the attack it received. The guy frowned at him, realizing that there was no special strategy against the troll. He made a cut across the monster's body, knowing that only constant attacks would work. The King of Fists he knew was able to kill the troll and gain the title of being trained. He imagined Yu Hyan standing over the monster's corpse. The main character knew that he had succeeded, because he did not allow him to recover and cause damage without stopping. He made several more cuts along the troll's body. Seong Hwa brought a healing potion to the wounded man. He asked how the guy was. A system window appeared. The effect of an excellent hunter worked. Hyuk Jin dodged the attack. He saw the trajectory of the blows and can dodge, because he invested a lot of points in agility. Fatigue can be relieved with potions that he bought in the store. The troll struck again, but it missed the guy. The main character's sword was bloody. The guy understood that if he was careful, he could finish him off. The monster jumped and swung its fist, screaming loudly. Hyuk Jin pulled his sword back, deciding to fight a battle of attrition. Copious splashes of blood hit the floor of the tower. The rest of the survivors watched the battle tensely. The girl asked who this guy was. The guy lying on the ground asked if he had come to help. Another survivor asked how long the battle lasted. They guessed that for about an hour. The main character was sweating heavily and breathing heavily. He dodged the blow again and attacked the monster with his sword. The survivors did not understand how a person could fight so much. The wounded man looked at him in amazement. He thought that Yu Hyan was a genius, but he realized that this guy was much stronger. Hyuk Jin took the sword in both hands as he tried to catch his breath. A system window appears. An item from the slot has been used. He wiped the sweat from his face, thinking about what he had tried on himself and realized how difficult it was. He's been fighting the monster for an hour now, and it's still standing. A system window appeared, the troll's regeneration disappeared. The main character saw that the monster was already staggering and was close to the limit. Hyuk-jin gritted his teeth, breathing rapidly, and realized that in the past he would never have thought of getting involved in such a dangerous battle. He imagined his past self standing behind him and thought about the civil servant Hyuk-jin becoming a Hyuk-jin player. He raised his sword and frowned, telling himself to concentrate. He had about 15 minutes left before he had a chance to finish everything. The guy concentrated and thought that there was still a little time left. A system window has appeared. The brave Lion King wants to help you. The main character was taken aback. His pupils narrowed. Several system windows have appeared. The gift of outstanding power is applied. The power of your next attack is increased by 100%. Hyuk-jin gripped the hilt of his sword tighter, surprised. The troll looked at the guy with hostility and aggression, who did not understand why this was happening now. He realized that it was too late. The main character swung. A system window appears. The attack deals double damage. Hyuk-jin realized that calculating damage had become useless. Blood flowed from the monster's forehead and body, and he screamed loudly. He grabbed his wounded face. The main character looked at him, thinking that the Lion King had ruined the whole plan. He clenched his teeth angrily, mentally swearing at the guard. The troll knelt down, screaming loudly in pain. The man looked at him in amazement and said that the guy managed it alone. The monster bared its teeth angrily and began to growl. The survivor shouted that the monster was almost killed. Hyuk-jin became tense and angry, realizing that the Lion King definitely did this on purpose. He looked at the boss and thought that if he had a chance to kill the guard, he would definitely do it with the Lion King. A red hostile aura appeared around the troll. The main character realized that his plan had failed. He frowned and pursed his lips, saying that he would have to run. Yu Hyan finally woke up. He opened one eye and was taken aback. Seong Hwa sat next to him, empty potion bottles in her hands. She asked if he was awake and said to just wait here. The guy turned to her and asked what happened to the monster. The girl replied that if he was talking about the boss, then he was there. Yu Hyan looked in this direction and was taken aback, asking if it was really the boss. He saw that the aura was completely different, and the troll was bleeding from his nose. The guy asked what happened. Suddenly someone fired a wooden bow. Hyuk-jin turned around and was horrified. The arrow hit the monster right in the forehead. Blood flowed profusely from the wound down the troll's face. The main character looked at him in horror. The guy with the bow smiled and asked if it worked and if it killed him. He smiled evilly and began to laugh, shouting that he had succeeded and he could not allow his loot to be stolen from him, because they were the first to come for him. He brazenly asked if Hyuk-jin was going to take away their achievements. The main character clenched his hands into fists and remained silent. He told him to run without even turning to the guy. Hyuk-jin turned around and ordered him to run, because he would not be able to protect him. The guy stopped smiling and asked what he was talking about. A red system window appeared. The boss magic troll has lost his mind. The monster lowered his head, clenching his hands into fists. A system window has appeared. The boss goes into a berserk state. An arrow fell from his forehead, breaking into two parts, and he bared his teeth. The main character ran towards Seong Hwa and told her to run. A new system window has appeared. Since the boss has lost his mind, the boss area disappears. The girl started to run away and asked where. Hyuk-jin shouted to run with all his might to the escalator. A system window has appeared. Escalator to floor 1. Mini boss area of Tower D accommodates 15 people. Reload, absent for going down. The escalator was black with yellow lines. The guy who shot the bow looked scared. The troll approached him. The guy began to run away and begged for help. The monster extended its huge hand towards him. He crushed the guy's head, leaving only a wet mark. Yu Hyan had a huge amount of bruises on his face as he looked at the cruel scene in shock. The guy's corpse lay on the floor in a pool of blood. The troll looked back and saw Yu Hyan there. The escalator moved slowly down. Hyuk-jin and Seong Hwa ran as fast as they could. The main character sadly lowered his gaze, thinking that it was his mistake. Events that take place for the entertainment of the guards. Events caused by the greed of other players. Hyuk-jin believed that it was his own fault for not taking this into account in his plan, and due to the berserker state, the boss zone disappeared. He ran near the elevator, thinking that now the boss was not limited to the second floor, and there were no safe places left in the dungeon. He looked at the 3 elevators. The main character stopped and began to breathe heavily. He said to go downstairs because he understood that the parking lot would be safe. Seong Hwa asked why they would go there, and Hyuk-jin replied that they would use the fire escape and get to the second underground floor. There was a door next to the soda machine. The main character imagined the tower building in his head. He began to open the door leading to the stairs and thought that there was a safe zone on the second floor of the parking lot. He opened the door and a frightened Seong Hwa stood behind him. Suddenly the guy turned around in alarm. He saw the boss's sharp fangs. The magic troll was already heading towards them. The main character presented the corpses, deciding that everyone on the second floor was dead. The boss growled loudly as he rushed towards them. He stomped loudly, eager to kill them. Hyuk-jin gritted his teeth and extended his hand forward. He grabbed Seong Hwa's hand. She was scared. The troll has already entered the landing. The guy hugged the girl and jumped down with her. He fell on his back and Seong Hwa squealed in fear. The main character clenched his teeth, looked up, and tried to calm down. The monster stood near the stairs and looked down. Hyuk-jin knew that if he touched them even once, it would be the end. The troll climbed down the flight of stairs and looked at the guy. He didn't understand why the safe zone was so far away. He saw the transparent door to the parking lot. They were almost there. The main character grabbed the door handles and began to open it. Suddenly, for some reason, he stopped, making an excited face. A system window appears. The system has detected a critical situation. Hyuk-jin froze in place, not moving. Several system windows appeared. Conditions were checked. A unique situation and a special encounter with the boss of the training zone. Forcefully awakens a unique ability. The guy was sweating a lot. He didn't turn around, but he saw the fist that the boss raised. The unique ability of the sixth sense was forcibly awakened. The main character looked back and saw the monster attacking. Hyuk-jin clenched his teeth and began to tremble, thinking that he would die and that would be the end. Suddenly Seong Hwa stood between him and the monster's fist. She took the attack on herself. Tears came to her eyes, and blood began to flow from her mouth. The guy was horrified and shouted her name. A few minutes before these events, Seong Hwa looked at the guy with horror, realizing that if this happened, everyone would die. The troll growled aggressively and swung its fist. He had already begun to attack, shouting loudly. The main character looked at this with alarm. Seong Hwa thought that she would not be able to block the attack. Several system windows appeared. A Libra woman admires your courage. She gives the player Seong Hwa the Platinum Shield skill. Use the Platinum Shield skill. The girl thought that if she didn't let him die, she would stop the blow. She put her hands in front of her, and the monster's fist hit the shield. Several system windows appeared. The Platinum Shield detected excessive physical force. The skill distributes damage evenly. Seong Hwa clenched her teeth and began to bleed from her mouth. Hyuk-jin looked at her in fear and shouted her name. The troll's fist hit the wall. The girl was thrown to the side. The main character managed to catch her. He picked her up and realized she was using a platinum shield. Seong Hwa's eyes were closed and she was breathing heavily. The boss turned around. Hyuk-jin looked at the girl and realized that she was unconscious. The troll struck again, but the guy managed to dodge. He ran towards the safe zone. They were almost there. He frowned. His pupils constricted. They needed to cross the line. All that was left was to go through the glass door. There were cars in the parking lot. Hyuk-jin jumped into the glass door backwards and broke it. He fell on the asphalt and they ended up in the parking lot. He gritted his teeth and looked back, realizing that they had made it. This was an additional safe zone. The troll ran towards the broken door. However, he crashed into an invisible wall. Hyuk-jin looked at him and breathed heavily. He was glad that the troll could not pass, although there are monsters that can ignore safe zones. The boss began to hit the barrier, feeling angry and aggressive, but even the berserker state would not help him get through. The main character took Seong Hwa's hand and tried to wake her up. Her little hands were crippled. He couldn't believe she tried to stop the attack with it. He took out a healing potion and opened the bottle. The guy brought the neck of the bottle to the girl's mouth and poured the potion into her. He didn't know when Seong Hwa got the skill, but it saved her. But the problem is that due to the distribution of damage, the brain could be damaged. The troll continued to pound his fists on the barrier. The main character began to open a new bottle of potion and cursed. He wanted the boss to finally die. There were many bruises on the troll's back from blows. Hyuk-jin said that judging by how quickly he went into berserk mode, he had almost no health left. He opened a new bottle of potion and saw something strange. Blood began to flow from the monster's body. He howled loudly in pain as he bled red. A second later, the monster's body exploded. Hyuk-jin looked at it. A system window appeared. The magic troll was killed. The boss's blood got on the glass door. The main character was tense. A system window appeared. The kill was credited to a player below level 20, who was close to the monster. A magical glow appeared next to the guy. It was Senia. She turned to him and said that he would get the murder. The main character looked at her while holding Seong Hwa in his arms and said nothing. Several system windows have appeared. The training zone is disappearing due to the death of the training boss. Completed the tutorial quest. Further difficulty will be determined by the number of survivors. Hyuk-jin lowered his gaze to the girl. Several system windows have appeared, checking the number of survivors in the training area. 5,087 survivors found. Difficulty set to low. The surviving people looked around the street and asked if it was all over. The main character looked at the empty potion bottle and realized that this was the same number as in his previous life. He didn't understand why it didn't change if he and Seong Hwa survived. He hugged the girl tighter, gritting his teeth. Several system windows have appeared. The calculation of training rewards has begun. System-wide reward, player qualification. 1,000 coins, beginner armor set. Individual awards will be given out by mid-ranking administrators. The level limit for players has been removed, receiving the title of having completed training. The second floor of the tower was filled with corpses lying in dried blood. Several system windows have appeared. The one who completed the training will be given to the survivor who was on the second floor of the dungeon of Tower D. The one who completed the training will be given to the player Yu Hyun. The player's record will appear in the Hall of Fame. Yu Hyun himself was lying on the floor, bleeding from his mouth and nose. The main character realized that Yu Hyun was still the only survivor on the second floor. He threw the empty potion bottle onto the floor. He looked at Seong Hwa's face, which was covered with sweat, and realized that something else was important now. Hyuk-jin turned to Senia and she looked at him. He looked at the administrator and asked if she remembered about the deal, after which he offered to make a deal. He needs to do everything to save Seong Hwa. He put on a serious face and said that he wanted to raise the rank of the item shop now. Senia asked if he was sure. He pressed his finger on the store rank and asked what she was talking about. The fair-haired administrator said that she was talking about the terms of the deal. The store's rank rises sometime after completing training. Just wait. She asked if this required an exclusive contract. Hyuk-jin was scrolling through the system window and glanced at her. He pressed the button to purchase 10 healing potions for 4,000 coins. An exclusive contract is a contract between a player and an administrator. After imprisonment, the guards will only be able to look at the player through the appropriate administrator. He imagined Senia standing behind him. The more attention a player attracts, the more the administrator receives. He imagined Senia covered in gold coins. The guy believed that he had probably become famous as a person who attracts problems, and therefore should be highly valued. He picked up a round bottle of potion. He gave this potion to Seong Hwa and said that she doesn't have that much time. He doesn't need other reasons. Without her he would have died already. Hyuk-jin pursed his lips and frowned slightly. He believed that he owed her his life and would do anything to save her. Seong Hwa lay in his arms with her eyes closed. There were empty potion bottles lying near the guy's feet. He looked at the girl with excitement and hoped that she would wake up. The guy clenched his teeth, lowering his head. Seong Hwa's mouth began to move slowly. She opened her eyes in shock and asked if she was alive. Hyuk-jin smiled with relief and answered affirmatively, saying that it was something. The girl stood up and said in amazement that she had survived. She noticed empty potion bottles on the floor. Seong Hwa looked at the main character and reminded her that according to him, he would leave her if he caused problems. He awkwardly turned away and remained silent. The guy was embarrassed. He rubbed his neck. Hyuk-jin awkwardly lowered his gaze and said that she barely managed to survive and it would be a shame to just leave me. The teenager burst into tears and asked if she had really been abandoned. The main character turned to Senia and told her to start counting the individual rewards. She lowered her gaze and accepted his request. Hyuk-jin smiled looking at her and said regarding the store's rank increase that they didn't sign anything. This made the administrator take aback. Her pupils constricted and she began to shake. She seemed to flare up with rage. Hyuk-jin knew that to be confirmed by the system, you need to sign a document. And this is a rookie mistake. Seong Hwa clung to him. The guy told Senia that it was her own fault for not preparing the contract. He ordered her to issue individual awards. She closed her eyes irritably and said that the Hyuk-jin reward comes first. Translucent lines appeared in the air. A bright glow appeared in front of the main character. Then, 2 system windows appeared in front of him. He smiled contentedly and raised his index finger, asking if it was a jackpot. The 7-day training is over. System windows appeared in front of different people. Players who survived received rewards that corresponded to their achievements. Yu Hyun was lying on the floor. He received the title of having completed the training. Hyuk-jin also received a reward, and a system window appeared in front of him. He remembered how he dealt with the goblin soldier. He also thought about how he killed the lycanthrope. Then, he remembered the magical troll. This is impossible to repeat if you don't know the battle strategy. Because of the guy's influence, training has changed a lot. He hoped that the reward would be different. His face was calm. A status window appeared. He was level 18, 6 bonus points and 3 random points. All 9 points were undistributed. Suddenly he noticed that the title had changed a little to Excellent Player. Senia looked at him and said that the Excellent Hunter had an increased rank, and suggested that he look at the effects. He grinned and said that he would see for himself. Senia became gloomy. A system window appeared, Excellent Player, a special title that can only be obtained in the training zone after defeating the boss of the training zone. The promotion improves the title to all hunted objects. Additional damage by 20%. Movement speed increased by 20%. Special skill Excellent Strike. Attack with a certain chance of ignoring the target's special attributes. Experience gained increased by 10%. Hyuk-jin was a little taken aback, because even an Excellent Hunter was a good title, but he didn't know if it was normal to receive such a thing in training. He ran his hand over the system window, remembering the promotion conditions. An image of a werewolf and a system window appeared. A new player who defeated the lycanthrope immediately after reaching level 10. Seong Hwa stood next to him. The main character realized that this condition was almost impossible to fulfill. He never thought that such an amazing title could be obtained here. Hyuk-jin turned his attention to another system window. A smile appeared on his face. He looked at the system windows, thinking that even it could not compare with the last reward. Several system windows appear. You have overcome a deadly situation with the help of your sixth sense and fulfilled the conditions of the merger. Shine training bonus and unique ability. Goal, title Excellent Player. A fusion of beta test bonus and unique ability. Target, the eyes of a cold-blooded observer. The main character looked at this and thought about merging. There were few records about this, and they contained almost no useful information. He introduced books and scrolls, as well as a man with a blue orb at his chest. This is a method of strengthening that has rarely been seen even among the best players. It seems that Hyuk-jin also didn't know much about training. He raised his hand to his lips. He needed to make a choice. He had access to the fusion of his sixth sense, which he received because of the troll. The main character remembered their meeting on the stairs. His right eye was covered with a blue light. It was the eye of the cold-blooded observer from the beta test. There was a sword in his hand, a training bonus called an Excellent Player. A smile appeared on his face and he extended his index finger forward. A system window has appeared. Merge the sixth sense and the eyes of a cold-blooded observer. Hyuk-jin pressed the yes button. The merger began. The guy with a calm face wondered if it had worked. Suddenly he frowned and his pupils constricted. He grabbed his chest and started screaming in pain. It felt like his heart was going to explode. Tears appeared in Seong Hwa's eyes and she called out to Hyuk-jin. She asked what happened while the main character was trembling and gritting his teeth. Several system windows appeared. The merging process is accompanied by severe pain. You will die if you are not able to withstand it. Electric shocks appeared around Hyuk-jin's heart. Blood began to flow from his mouth. He did not understand what was happening. Blood got on his shirt and t-shirt. Seong Hwa was at a loss. The main character thought it was necessary to say this right away. The capillaries in his eyes burst and the whites of his eyes turned red. Blood began to flow from his nose and mouth, and lightning appeared around his body. Seong Hwa asked what happened to him and asked him not to lose consciousness. There were ventilation pipes and lighting on the ceiling. Hyuk-jin fell to the floor, his eyes bloodshot. The girl screamed that he could not die here. Several system windows appeared. The merger was successful. Obtained eyes of perception. Seong Hwa's silhouette turned white and began to fade. Hyuk-jin began to slowly open his eyes. He woke up in bed, dressed in pajamas. He got out of bed and realized that he was in a hospital room. He looked down in confusion, surprised that he was alive. The main character turned back because he thought he heard some kind of alarm. A girl with long black hair sat next to him. It was his older sister. She frowned with displeasure. Her name was Kim Ayoung. She was 24 years old. The system window appeared. Kim Ayoung, not awakened. Status, relief, happiness, worry. Tendencies, sacrifice, directness, love. Brief description, devoted sister. The proclivities and brief description may vary depending on the situation. Detailed information is not available due to low eye-level perception. Hyuk-jin asked himself what this nonsense was. It seemed to him that at that age she was the same as them. Kim Ayoung was shaking with anger and said that he went to study and came back a week later. She stood up from her chair and asked if he had thought about how they would react. The guy awkwardly looked away. The girl approached the door to the corridor. She frowned and finally said that at least he was alive, and that was good. She slammed the door loudly. The main character knew that she would not change in 10 years and would be just as rude. Suddenly he heard sobs and was surprised. Kim I-young stood in an empty hospital hallway. She frowned and started crying, saying that he could just die if he was going to die. She asked, "Is it possible to make me worry so much?" Hyuk-jin looked towards the door without saying anything. A system window began to appear in front of him. He realized that the merger had ended when he lost consciousness. He had a unique ability called the Eye of Perception. The main character realized that he heard his sister crying because of this ability. He covered his face with his hand, thinking about how he didn't want to make her cry. He narrowed his eyes a little. Kim I-young was still standing in the hallway crying. Hyuk-jin mentally told her that she would no longer need to go to the factory for him. His mother also came to the hospital. He was going to help her in the future. She was very alarmed. The woman entered the room. The main character thought that they could live together as a family. He wanted to make this possible. His mother approached his bed, covering her mouth. She reached out her hand to his smiling face. Suddenly Seong Hwa ran into the room from the corridor. She began to cry bitterly and called out to Hyuk-jin. He and his mother looked at her in surprise. The girl rushed into his arms and shouted that she was so glad, because she had time to think that he would die. She held him tightly as tears streamed down her cheeks. The main character smiled and stroked her head. He went back in time. 7 days of training. An event with terrible survivability that was remembered even 10 years later. The guy remembered his meeting with the goblin soldier. Memories of how he outwitted the lycanthrope also arose in his head. In this hell, where talent and luck are tested, he survived. He couldn't forget the moment when he had to choose a reward. Hyuk-jin remembered the feeling when choosing a merger. He gained abilities he never imagined. A blue aura and light appeared around him. Seoul Station. The sky was blue, the clouds were slowly floating. A blue portal appeared at the station. The passengers were scared. The man frowned and shouted in panic that he needed to report this. While everyone was running away from the portal, Hyuk-jin and Seong Hwa were walking towards it. His gaze was calm and focused. He promised that this time he would change everything. A month has passed since the greatest disaster that occurred in Jongno. People still remembered how goblins tore apart people's corpses. The news presenter in the studio said that among the 160,000 victims, only 5,000 people survive. Then an anomalous phenomenon, also known as training, occurred in Seoul, but the shock from those events has not yet subsided. The presenter closed his eyes and said that many people live with great mental pain, because they have lost their loved ones and neighbors. Before graduation, they would like to express their condolences to all the families affected by this disaster. The man glanced to the side and said that they had invited a special guest to commemorate the training incident. He looked at the invited guest and said that he was a trained person who, even in hellish conditions, led and helped many people. It was Yoo Hyun. He was wearing a white shirt. The news anchor looked at the information sheets and said that according to the survivors who met him, he played a key role in the incident. According to them, the goblin or wolf monsters that caused enormous damage were killed by Yoo Hyun with his bare hands. They imagined that the blood of his opponents was dripping from the guy's fists. The reporter said that he saved a large number of people who could have died. The news anchor was sorting through the sheets and said that he heard that the guy was awarded the title of having completed the training. He asked what he could say about it. Yoo Hyun lowered his head without saying anything. He remembered his first meeting with Hyuk-jin and Seong Hwa. He clasped his hands and said that he was just lucky. The guy looked down and said that he wasn't the hero of the training. He just took all the credit for himself. The reporter looked at him and replied that modesty is often called the quality of a hero, but it was obvious to everyone that he was a hero of learning. These words made him wince, because this was not modesty at all. He remembered how Seong Hwa saved him. Yoo Hyun could not forget the fight between the troll and Hyuk-jin, considering him a player of a completely different level. He would have died without his help. A picture appeared in his head as he stood behind his boss. The guy frowned, thinking that the player who saved him had definitely survived. Yoo Hyun promised that one day he would definitely repay the help. The bright blue portal formed a funnel. The main character looked at it, remembering that a small gate appeared at the second entrance of Seoul Station on June 7th, and it leads to the underground of Seoul Station. People ran away from there in panic. They asked where to run and where it was safe. Seong Hwa was wearing a shirt and vest and asked if they were going in. A system window has appeared. Only players can use the gate. Recommended number of players, 7 people, minimum level, 10. Want to enter the dungeon? A grin appeared on Hyuk-jin's face and he said that the answer was obvious. Several system windows appeared. You entered the underground of Seoul Station. Channel number 19207 is open. The guards begin viewing. A strong wind was blowing. Hyuk-jin and Seong Hwa stayed close to each other. There was darkness and rocky cliffs all around. The protagonist picked up his sword, thinking that many players would come here in the future to level up. If you know how to clear it, Tower D becomes even easier, so this is also a training dungeon. Hyuk Jin turned to Seong Hwa and asked if she remembered his words. She answered in the affirmative and they walked forward. They were told that at least 7 players were recommended. The main character drew attention to the source of the voice. Xenia appeared in front of them and said that this was a warning from a mid-ranking administrator. She, with her typical emotionless face, announced that the manual said that a minimum of 7 people should be taken into this dungeon. It was too dangerous to go together. She asked him to leave and return with the group. Hyuk Jin looked at her and sighed. A system window appears. You have left the safe zone. The main character and Seong Hwa walked past Xenia. She looked at them displeasedly, and Hyuk Jin asked if she had already forgotten. He turned to her and said that he would show his game. The Uedo business district. The man asked his interlocutor how he could just leave, saying that even though he was often shown on TV. Yu Hyun bowed his head apologetically and said that he was planning to take a different route. A balding old man with glasses sat at the computer. He told the guy that their company was not the weakest, and he had passed the selection process, but still let him go. There were a lot of different people on the street. Yu Hyun put on his hat and merged with the crowd, thinking that the world has changed. Weak monsters like slime appear even outside the dungeons. The slime appeared next to the woman, who screamed. Players' items have already been raided, and they have begun to be sold. A system window has appeared. Novice recovery potion. The effect is better than most drugs. Yu Hyun realized that the fastest way to adapt was to follow the player's path. The freckled guy looked at his smartphone and said that they should run. The girl asked why. He replied that the same gate as in Jongno had appeared at the station. Yu Hyun tensed as soon as he heard this. A small holographic cyclops appeared next to him. He turned to the guy and asked if this was the first dungeon after training. It was Neptune, a mid-ranking administrator. He pointed his finger forward and invited the person who had been trained to try, but said that he needed to assemble a team of 7 people. Neptune crossed his arms and said that 2 people entered there. He looked at the confused Yu Hyun and showed the number 4 with his fingers, telling him to find 4 more to enter. The guy looked at the system window about the appearance and clearing of dungeons. The dungeon will collapse if it is not cleared for a certain time. Monsters will be able to break out if there is destruction or a dungeon breakthrough. Only players can clear the dungeon. Inside the dungeon it was dark and cool. All sounds were reflected from the stone walls. Seong Hwa and Hyuk Jin walked past the burning torch. The girl looked at everything in surprise. The main character told her to watch her step. He looked into the darkness of the damp and cold cave that was the underground of the Seoul station. The guy activated his eye of perception. He looked back, thinking that there would be no danger in the first half. He looked at the girl. Her status window appeared. Seong Hwa. Level 15, age 14. Status: loneliness, fear, trust, strong will. Worldview: neutral and curious. Brief description: slight addiction. The class was not chosen. The guard was not chosen. The proclivities and brief description may vary depending on the situation. Detailed information is not available due to low eye-level perception. Suddenly Seong Hwa noticed something. She said the road splits. There was a fork in front of them, and there were strange round seals on the ground. Hyuk Jin realized that they had come to the crossroads of 7 paths. There was a sword in his hands, and a girl stood next to him. The main character remained calm. He knew that each of the 7 roads leads to caves where you can get different items. That is why it is recommended to take at least 7 players. When a person steps on each magic circle, a path of surmountable difficulties will open for 7 players above the 10th level. Whatever path they choose, the probability of dying is very high, because there are 2 of them. They stood surrounded by rocky walls. Xenia watched them with an emotionless face. Hyuk Jin smiled widely, thinking that she probably thought that nothing would work out between them. He took a step forward and told Seong Hwa to wait here. He will be back soon. With a sword in his hand, he went deeper into the cave. There was a magic circle under his feet. Several system windows appeared. The first dungeon path, Nefara's Road, is activated. The magic circle he stepped on began to glow brightly. A smile appeared on the main character's face. He was thinking about starting the dungeon. At Seoul Station there is a junction of 7 tracks. Each one must be cleared if the player wants to complete the dungeon. Someone was holding a sword in his hand. A guy with a torch in his hands was walking through the cave. Each path contains a different reward, but the main problem is that all 7 rewards are needed to clear the dungeon. The fiery light surrounded Hyuk Jin's feet. He thought that when the player enters one of the paths, the difficulty is automatically set to level 7 people. In other words, if they go the way of Nefaras, they will be forced to perform a task that is designed for 7 people together. However, he believed that this was not necessary. A bright light fell on the guy's face. He knew that the dungeon's strategy was quite famous since it was one of the first to open. The main character took a step back and looked at the glowing magic circle. Even some secret strategies have become public knowledge. He stepped on the new magic circle, realizing that in such a situation there was a way to clear out with fewer people. The circle under his feet began to glow. A system window appears. Fork 2, Dugo Road is activated. Hyuk-jin looked the other way, realizing that it was enough to take advantage of the fact that activating the path sets the difficulty. He stepped on the third magic circle. It was Fork 3, the Daranchi Road. The main character knew that 7 paths have a difficulty for 7 people. If one path receives a difficulty of 7, then the difficulty will decrease with each activated circle. All the circles in the dungeon were activated. The difficulty of each was set to 1. Seong Hwa turned to the guy and asked if he was finished. Hyuk-jin answered in the affirmative. He learned in a past life that in clearing conditions there is no task to go through all the paths at the same time, so such a strategy is possible. His face was illuminated and he turned around. There was a tunnel in front of them. A system window appeared. Go to Fork 1, Nefaras Road. A crowd of people stood near the station building. They looked worried and asked what was going on and if everything was okay. The entrance to the station was closed with barrier tape. There were police around. The military man shouted through a megaphone that they were investigating the situation at the Seoul train station and asked to follow the police instructions and calmly evacuate. The townspeople were confused. They looked nervously at the police officers. Yu Hyun was in this crowd. He knew that there was a dungeon gate inside. A humanoid creature with red skin asked the people what they were doing and why they were interfering with his broadcasts. He looked like a demon and had red horns and an imp tail. He said there was no point. People were surprised and asked if he was walking through the air. The military man, surrounded by police, ordered him to stop and identify himself. Yu Hyun's face became tense, realizing that he had seen him in the training area. It was a mid-ranking administrator named Chris, and he smiled slyly. Yu Hyun gritted his teeth excitedly and realized that if Chris was here, that player must be nearby, meaning Hyuk-jin. The soldier shouted through a megaphone that they would open fire if he did not comply. He repeated to him not to approach, otherwise they would shoot. The man looked scared. He shouted in panic that he had warned. Chris flew up to him and grabbed him by the face, asking what he would do. The receptionist grabbed him by the neck and lifted him into the air, telling him to take a chance and do something. The police ordered him to be released and said they would shoot if he did not let go. Chris turned his head 180 degrees and with a creepy smile offered to try it. Helmeted policemen started shooting at him with machine guns. A barrier appeared around Chris, from which the bullets bounced off. He grinned and drops of blood appeared on his fingertips. The administrator waved his hand, thereby attacking. One of the drops of blood hit the policeman's stomach. A second later it caught fire and was covered in flames. All the police began to burst into flames as they screamed in agony. They said to step back. Chris watched with a sadistic smile. He said insects are always so noisy. Yu Hyun looked at him silently. The administrator narrowed his eyes, put his hands in his pockets, and said that since he had cleared the road, it was time to start the game. He gave a crazy look and said that a rather famous bug had appeared here. He looked at Yu Hyun. He looked tense. A red-haired guy appeared next to Chris, greeted Yu Hyun and asked if they had met for the first time since training. The guy in the hat frowned and was taken aback. The red-haired man approached him and said that they had met about a month ago. Half of his face was hidden by his long bangs and he smiled. It was the player Ju Hwang. He raised his hand and said that he did not think that he would meet someone who had been trained here. Yu Hyun agreed with him that they had not seen each other for a long time. Ju Hwang narrowed his eyes and continued to smile. Yu Hyun thought he would survive. There was a group of players next to the red-haired guy. The guy in the hat hadn't seen him since the goblin attack, but he couldn't forget. Ju Hwang then stood over the goblin's corpse. Then there was a whole bunch of monsters covered in blood. While others ran away, he enjoyed the carnage. This player is intimidating, but definitely has strong skills. Ju Hwang smiled madly, feeling sadistic pleasure. At the moment, he smiled slyly, asking if Yu Hyun also decided to go through the station dungeon. He said that a player of his level had probably already noticed the changes in this world. Yu Hyun frowned and pursed his lips. Ju Hwang said that these things will continue to appear, changing their reality more and more. The portal to the dungeon was still open. The red-haired guy looked away and said that there were opportunities ahead that they had never dreamed of. Players should not miss it. Yu Haiyan remained nervously silent, looking at him. Zhu Huang grinned, narrowing his eyes, and said that they needed 7 people to complete the dungeon, according to the administrator. He raised his hand and said that he only had 6 players. The guy in the hat looked at him confused. Zhu Huang smiled artificially and offered to join them. Junction 1, Nefara's Road. A quiet hum came from the cave. There were black yaks inside. They were level 12. One of the yaks turned his head and paid attention. Hayek Jin cut off his black horn. The attacked yak fell on its back. He began to hum loudly. The main character turned around, and Seong Hwa was standing next to him. A crowd of yaks ran towards them. Seong Hwa stood up in a fighting pose. Hayek Jin said that they had a lot to do and needed to finish the hunt in order to move on. The yaks' hooves clattered loudly on the rocky surface. Dust rose all around. The animals exhaled steam from their noses. The main character concentrated and kept his sword ready. He swung his blade, preparing to attack. Hayek Jin cut off the horn of another yak, thereby killing it. Another opponent stood in front of him and began to bellow furiously. The guy jumped deftly, his shirt fluttering in the wind. He stepped on the yak's head and swung his sword. After this, the main character saddled the beast. While riding a yak, Hayek Jin cut off its horn. The yak let out a death rattle and began to fall. The main character jumped off it and ran towards the next enemy. His blade struck the horn accurately. He killed a black yak. His corpse was behind the guy's back. He received experience and 12 coins. The main character sighed wearily and looked at the pile of yaks' corpses. They finished off about 30 enemies. Seong Hwa was breathing heavily and called the guy. She began to repeat his movements and said that he did everything so cleverly, and after that the yaks fell. She looked questioningly at the guy and asked if everyone could do this. She shared that she had met other players, but this was the first time she had seen such movements. The girl asked what needs to be done to be able to do the same. Xenia paid attention to these words. Hayek Jin looked at her and answered Seong Hwa that no one knows. He understood that the administrator was definitely interested. He couldn't answer the girl honestly when they had so many guard spectators. The main character grinned and told the girl to keep practicing, and in the future she would definitely succeed. Senior remained silent, but began to shake. Several system windows have appeared. The unknown observer remains silent. The Libra woman is pleased with your answer. The whispering devil doesn't like your answer. Seong Hwa asked, slightly disappointed if only practice would help. Hayek Jin smiled and answered affirmatively, standing sideways to her. He advised her to train as if she did not want to regret anything, and if she always tried her best, then sooner or later she would succeed. After all, he himself had done this in his previous life. Seong Hwa didn't quite understand. She scratched her cheek and thought that since he said that, it must be true. Suddenly she noticed a strange sound. A ring was floating in the air next to her and she asked what it was. A golden ring with a precious stone and carvings flew above them. Hayek Jin reached out his hand to it, thinking that he was waiting for it to appear. He realized that they had cleared this let. The guy took the ring in his hand and told Seong Hwa that it was time to go to Fork 2. The girl was surprised and pointed at the black yaks, asking if they would kill these monsters. The main character replied that you won't get much experience from them, so no. Seong Hwa, walking behind the guy, turned around and said that she thought they would kill everyone like wolves. Hayek Jin replied that it was better to leave it this time. He looked ahead seriously and said that they were not alone here. Torches were burning near the dark tunnel. The players came out of the portal. They were grinning. Zhu Huang looked around and said that this dungeon is different from Tower D because there are caves. He smiled with his eyes closed and said that it still felt like a training dungeon, then asked Yu Haiyan if he felt nostalgic. The guy in the hat turned to him and said that he remembered that dungeon, but nothing good came to mind. Then more than 10 people were killed and he did not have enough strength to defeat the monster due to his mistake. Yu Haiyan sadly lowered his gaze without saying anything. Zhu Huang turned to him, smiling slyly. He looked ahead and suggested that we move on, because it would be safer to quickly clear everything and leave. The players walked deeper into the cave, torches burning next to them. The guy in the cap and hood called Zhu Huang and told him to look ahead, because there were several passages. They came to a fork in the dungeons. The players asked if they needed to go through this in any particular order. They began to look around and asked what the glowing circles in front of the entrances were. Zhu Huang pointed to the inner circle and suggested checking. It was Fork 1, Nefara's Road. The magic circle was shining brightly. A chain with a red gemstone pendant floated in the air. The main character extended his hand to it. A system window appears. Dugo's necklace has been received. Hayek Jin took the item in his hand and thought that it appeared faster than the ring. Xiang Hwa smiled sweetly and asked if they would now take the third path. The guy answered in the affirmative. The girl has already begun to understand the concept of key items, because getting them is much more important than killing monsters. The girl awkwardly rubbed the back of her head and lowered her gaze. She turned to the guy and apologized, because she thought she was too slow. Xiang Hwa said that she saw him fight. The girl then tried to catch her breath, and while she was breaking the horn of one yak, he killed several. She looked at his sword prowess in amazement. Xiang Hwa looked to the side sadly and assumed that he was strong enough to handle it alone, so she began to wonder what was stopping him. Hyuk Jin looked at her slightly dumbfounded and told her not to talk nonsense. He asked if she had ever seen him do something useless. This question made the girl taken aback and she answered negatively. The main character went ahead and said that he cares about her not only because she is a child and let her understand that. He suggested taking the third path. A system window appears. You have entered Junction 3, Daranchi Road. Grass grew next to the rocky cliffs. Xiang Hwa opened her eyes wide and sighed. This time the yaks were purple. They had 3 horns. They were level 14. Their eyes were red and steam came out of their noses. The girl was taken aback and looked at them in confusion. The yak tilted its head forward and seemed to shoot its horns. Xiang Hwa was confused and did not understand what happened. One horn hit her right on the forehead and bounced off. Hyuk Jin looked at her and asked if she was in pain. She rubbed her forehead and answered in the negative, saying that something had come straight to her head. The girl looked down to see what hit her forehead. A horn dug into the grass. The main character said that the purple yak can shoot with its horns. He put his hand on Xiang Hwa's shoulder and said that everything would be fine since she said it didn't hurt. The main character looked at the opponents and said that he was leaving them to the girl, because she was their great tank. The herd of yaks ran aggressively towards Xiang Hwa. She smiled nervously and a tear appeared in her eye. Several horns were heading in their direction at once. The girl covered her head with her hands. She blocked some of the projectiles, and something flew past. Hyuk Jin grinned and said that she was much better at blocking than he thought. Xiang Hwa, almost crying, said not to say such things just because she could not be hurt. The main character narrowed his eyes and said that the yak could not harm her and let her use provocation. The girl covered her face with her hands, and a blue shield appeared around her. A wind formed around the shield. The yaks looked at her with aggression. They began to become more hostile, veins bulging on their faces and necks. The enemies bowed their heads and met with their horns. The attacks hit Xiang Hwa and she covered her face. When the attack stopped, the girl looked in surprise towards the enemies. She saw that the yaks began to simply fall. She gained experience. The main character told her that the purple yak dies if both horns are shot. The girl turned to him and said that now she understood. A blue bracelet was floating in the air near the ground. Hyuk Jin said that the thing they needed had already appeared. He extended his hand to Daranch's bracelet, thinking that there were still 4 forks left. Xiang Hwa bent one arm and asked if they would leave this time too, because yaks give more experience and she would like to hunt. The guy closed his eyes and said that there might be other players here and it was better to leave the monsters to the rest. He opened his black eyes, saying that then they would take longer to catch up with them. Another group of players were already fighting the monsters. One of them was holding back the yak, while the others just watched. Yu Hyan swung his fist, concentrating on the attack. He hit the yak right in the face. The guy frowned and exhaled, yak saliva flying past him. The beast coughed up blood and fell dead. The players were surprised that he defeated him with one blow, and the guy was on a completely different level. Ju Huang looked at him suspiciously. The sounds of blows and the rustling of grass could be heard within the walls of the cave. Ju Huang picked up the torn horn from the ground and said that the effectiveness was weak. He looked at the horn in his hand and said that they were hard prey and they only found a weak spot thanks to the corpses that did not have horns, and they did not give much experience. He threw it away and said it was a bad dungeon reward. Ju Huang looked at Yu Hyan and asked what he thought. The guy in the hat thoughtfully agreed with him and said that they didn't come across anything worthwhile. The red-haired guy put his hand to his chin, saying that even for defeating all the yaks they were not given anything. He turned to the other players, smiled, and said that there was no point in standing there any longer. They decided to take a different path. A system window appeared. Go to Fork 2, Dugo Road. Yaks were grazing in a field of vegetation. Yu Hyan and Ju Huang looked at them and the latter said that there are black yaks here too. The red-haired guy turned the other way and sighed. He saw corpses without horns lying on the ground. Ju Huang frowned. Yu Hyan looked at him with excitement, wondering what he was thinking about. The red-haired man looked to the left with displeasure and tisked. 2 players were wrestling with a yak and thinking about how to cut off its horn. Ju Huang realized that this was unusual, because there were many rewards and titles in the training dungeon, Perhaps the reward was waiting for them far ahead. He narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Then, he looked the other way and suggested that the reward could have been taken before them. The white-eyed yak was missing its left horn. Zhu Chuang kicked the animal's corpse and decided that it was unlikely, since they were the only group that entered after Administrator Chris cleared the road. He didn't understand where players could come from who could clear the dungeon faster than Yu Haiyan. His pupils constricted and he lowered the corners of his lips. He introduced Hyuk Jin from behind, with yak horns flying around him. Zhu Chuang realized that someone could get ahead of him and had already reached the middle of the clearing. He began to twist the knife on his finger. Yu Haiyan looked at him. The red-haired guy took the handle of the knife and invited everyone to deal with the monsters and try a different path. He smiled coolly and held the knife in front of him, suggesting that they were missing something. Junction 6, Victoria Road. Yaks grazed next to trees with green foliage. Xiong Hwa, breathing tiredly next to the corpse. Hyuk Jin sighed and leaned on his sword. A shield with gold stucco appeared in front of him. He took the object in his hands and thought about it. The main character began to look at the Victoria shield. He hoped to give this key item to his tank. But the strength is not so great that it can be used as normal equipment. The object in his boyfriend's hands began to disappear. The girl guessed what they would do next. The Athena necklace from Fork 4 looked like a golden horseshoe on a rope. The Zenith Club is a stone hammer. They found it at Fork 5. The last item found was the Victoria shield from Fork 6. It looked like it was made of marble. Hyuk Jin said that only the key item of the last path remained. Xiong Hwa was trying to catch her breath. She asked if they could clear the dungeon then. The guy answered in the affirmative and looked at her, offering to go further. They approached the last glowing magic circle. The girl looked at the last path with excitement. Suddenly she was taken aback, noticing something. Xiong Hwa looked up and told Hyuk Jin to look up there. Zhu Chuang and Yu Haiyan stood on the rocks with a group of players. They were surprised that his other players were there, but Yu Haiyan recognized them immediately. He frowned as he realized it was them. The main character smiled, looking at them. He knew that they would be caught up, but it turned out much later than expected, and assumed that they were newcomers. The red-haired boy looked at them, his face half hidden by his hair. A crazy grin appeared on his face and he asked if it was them. The wind whistled through the stone walls of the dungeon. Hyuk Jin pursed his lips as he looked at the people and realized that it was the group that entered after them. He turned his attention to Yu Haiyan, wondering if he was somehow connected with them, and an information window began to appear in front of him. The main character noticed this, opening his mouth slightly. The guy in the hat looked at him in surprise and said that he did not expect to meet him here. A system window appears. Yu Haiyan, player. Level 17, age 20. No title, class or guard. Unique ability, finish with 1 hit. Status, happy, surprised. Worldview, neutrality, fairness, broad-minded, limited. Brief description, a chatterbox who does not like to remain in debt. Hyuk Jin noticed the contradictions, because you cannot have a broad and limited outlook at the same time. However, he decided that it didn't matter now. He had a friendly smile on his face and Xiong Hwa was standing next to him. Zhu Chuang had moccasins on his feet. He asked who they had here. He put one hand in his pocket and asked with a smile if they were new friends. The red-haired guy narrowed his eyes and said that they passed by monsters that were killed, and asked the main character if this was his work. Hyuk Jin answered in the affirmative with an emotionless face. He went back 10 years, so Zhu Chuang looks a little younger, but he's the same guy. Later, an organization of evil players will appear, which will be known as Nightmare. There were sinister smiles on their faces. This was the Demon King's army. The knife in the man's hand was piercing a human skull. They had enough strength to compete with the 8 heroes. The evil they committed was often unspeakable, and there were always notorious leaders at the forefront. He imagined the creepy smile on the red-haired guy's face. Zhu Chuang smiled with slightly narrowed eyes. In the future he will become a self-proclaimed leader and a maniac who is famous for his evil. The main character expected that he would meet one of them, but not so soon. He stood with a stony expression on his face. Zhu Chuang said that they were moving so fast. He, still smiling, asked if the two of them cleared everything together. Behind him stood a guy with freckles. Hyuk Jin, looking at them, replied that the two of them were quite enough. Zhu Chuang said that they had seen enough of their work. He smiled cheekily and reminded them that this dungeon was recommended for teams of 7 players, and then asked if they needed more people. The protagonist maintained his composure and replied that he would know if they couldn't move forward. The guy in the cap started getting angry, asking what was wrong with him. Zhu Chuang put his hand in front of him and said that he had a good offer. He pointed to his team and said that they were all quite skilled players compared to the other survivors after their training. Smug grins appeared on the guys' faces, and their leader suggested that they could clear the dungeon together since they met. He closed his eyes and declared that it would be safer and faster for them, and then they could share the reward for passing. Hyuk Jin started to look hostile and Seong Hwa was scared. Ju Hwang continued to smile slyly, saying that the dungeon belongs to no one anyway and he hopes for a wise decision. The girl put her hand on her stomach. She was nervously silent. The main character agreed and said that they would do so. Ju Hwang and the guy with freckles immediately began to smile. Hyuk Jin raised his finger and warned that he had a condition. The key item of the 7th path must be sold to him. A system window appears. You have entered Junction 7, Lakatul Road. The main character swung his sword at the yak. He cut off its horn and the purple yak was killed. Yu Hyun powerfully hit the yak with his bare fists. Experience was gained. Ju Hwang wielded his knife and enjoyed it. One of the players raised his hand and shouted that new monsters were coming from here. He told the others to lure them in one by one and kill them. At this time, the player with the spear was fighting with the yak. Seong Hwa clenched her hand into a fist, thinking that it would be much faster to cope together, but something was wrong. She noticed that Hyuk Jin was moving slower and not as efficient. The guy lowered his hands and was breathing heavily. The girl looked at him with concern, because before he could cope calmly alone, but now he looks exhausted. The yak was hit and blood began to flow from the wound. Ju Hwang wondered what trump card Hyuk Jin was hiding, since he cleared the path so quickly. But everything looks simpler, and even if you forget about fatigue, his skills do not look special. He pulled his knife from the corpse and looked to the side. He noticed the bright light. Lakatul's gold earrings hovered above the grass. Ju Hwang realized that this was the key subject he was talking about. He looked at the characteristics of the item and decided that it was useless. It gave almost nothing and its durability was very low. The red-haired guy didn't understand what was special about the earrings. The main character looked at him and asked if they got it. Ju Hwang, holding the earrings in his hands, answered in the affirmative. He gave the item to the main character and asked why they needed just old earrings. Hyuk Jin clutched the earrings in his hands and replied that they were needed to complete the quest that the first players who entered the dungeon received. They collected 7 items, so he would be able to complete this task. He gave the promised payment, and an information window began to appear in front of Ju Hwang. A system window appears. You have received 500 coins from player Hyuk Jin. Red-haired realized that for such a quantity it would be necessary to kill about 40 black yaks. He smiled widely, thinking that robbing them would be much easier than he thought. He smiled falsely and said that this attitude pleased him, because he immediately handed over the promised payment. He said that he would supposedly do everything possible to help pass the dungeon. Hyuk Jin sighed, closing his eyes, and said that since he himself was suggesting, we need to go deeper and finish the quest. Ju Hwang turned to his group and asked them to follow Hyuk Jin. Seong Hwa looked at them in disbelief. She turned to the main character and asked if everything was okay with him. The girl turned away from him, blushing, and said that it seemed to her that he was more tired than usual. Hyuk Jin waved it off and replied that he was fine. He lowered his gaze, pursing his lips. Ju Hwang had a fake smile on his face. He walked forward, holding a knife in his hands. A system window appears. Ju Hwang, player. Level 16, age 21. No title, class, guardian or unique ability. Status, excited, annoyed. Worldview, evil, cruel, hypocritical. Brief description, cruel sadist. The protagonist's face became cold. He could see all of Ju Hwang's disgusting features through his eyes of perception. In the past he was the same as he was 10 years later. The red-haired guy stood behind him. Hyuk Jin decided to see how long he could pretend and not show his vile nature. Ju Hwang smiled disgustingly, showing his white teeth. The room was made of white brick. There were destroyed columns inside. The main character walked inside holding his sword. He looked around the room, thinking that they had finally arrived. The stone sculpture had a thin face. A system window appears. You have arrived at Mandra Square. The statue was sitting in the lotus position. It was of colossal size. The stone statue Mandra opens its eyes. It begins to glow. Seong Hwa clung to him out of fear. The main character looked at it, thinking that the square appears after clearing the 7 paths. It was called the final destination. This name came about because no one knew how to complete the task of the Mandra statue. The sculpture seemed to be looking at them with its head bowed. He lowered his gaze and asked who dared to wake him up. Yu Hyun was taken aback and asked in fear if the statue was talking. Mandra said that only the worthy can stay, and let the rest leave, and if they stay, they will not be able to escape punishment. Ju Hwang tensed. His subordinate was scared. Hyuk Jin dared to take a step and walk forward. He stood right in front of the statue, because he had not come this far to give up. The main character looked into Mandra's face and declared that he could prove that he was worthy. A blue glowing sphere appeared in his chest. The statue continued to stare at him. The blue light of the sphere illuminated the bottom of the statue. It was clear from Hyuk Jin's face that he was tense and worried. Mandra ordered him to prove it. They looked at each other silently. A system window began to appear next to the main character. In the window there was a picture of a statue with circles on parts of its body. This was a test from the Mandra statue. Hyuk Jin frowned, narrowing his eyes. You must complete the text to complete the dungeon. If you fail, the subject's heart will be destroyed. He imagined his heart beating in his chest. The main character extended his hand forward and flexed his fingers. He opened his inventory and took out key items. It was necessary to give the items to the statue in the order of the forks. Hyuk Jin looked at the ring. It was surrounded by yellow light. A system window appeared. Do you want to give the window to Nefaras? The guy agreed, lowering his gaze. A red gem was set into the groove. All other key items glowed brightly. The system asked if he wanted to give it away. More and more red gems were inserted into the slots on the system window with the statue. A gold earring was inserted into the statue's earlobe. There were 2 necklaces hanging around his neck. There was a bracelet on his right hand and a ring on his middle finger. In the second hand of the statue lay a shield. Everything started to shake. Yu Hyun and Ju Hwang were taken aback. Mandra said that the main character proved his worth. Seong Hwa was also confused and scared. The statue asked to answer a question. His eyes turned red and he looked at Hyuk Jin and asked what his name was. The blue sphere in the guy's chest was still glowing brightly. He narrowed his eyes and began to answer the question. He remembered a video about a complete walkthrough of a place of despair at a Seoul train station. The man put his hand on the armrest. He was wearing a gray turtleneck. He said that the word Mandra means ranch. That is, the statue of Mandra is the guard of the ranch. A bed could be seen in the background. The man said the mission was simple. It is located near the Seven Forks pastures where yaks graze. The rancher has hidden something inside the dungeon, and the guard is waiting for his return. Actively gesturing with his hands, the man advised not to give his real name, because there was a hidden reward in this dungeon. Hyuk Jin paused the video and carefully recorded everything. In his notebook was written the word Mandra, and next to it he wrote the word ranch. At this moment, the main character answered that he is the owner of the Mandra statue, and he is the one who gave him new life. The statue looked down at him. With a calm face, the guy said his name was Rancher. This caused the statue to be taken aback. The rest of the players were tense and confused. They did not understand what he was talking about. Seong Hwa was very worried about Hyuk Jin. The statue bowed to the main character and greeted him, calling him master. Several system windows appeared. You have found the correct answer. You have completed the hidden quest. The main character smiled, thinking that now he could receive a reward. 3 system windows appear. The unknown observer tilts his head. Woman with scales is surprised. The whispering devil is interested. Seong Hwa began to smile nervously, and the other players did not understand why the statue bowed and who the owner was. Yu Hyun smiled relaxedly, because he was worried that something bad would happen. He thought Hyuk Jin was special. The statue got down on one knee and showed the items that were entrusted to him. He asked to select one. A system window appeared. Select an item. Breastplate Mandra, Great Sword Mandra, Gloves Mandra. The main character realized that this was the hidden reward of the dungeon, and it would be much easier later if he received it now. He glanced at the window, wondering what to choose if that place came up next. Ju Hwang came up behind him and congratulated him on receiving a special award. He raised his hand and asked if he should wait because he couldn't see anything. Hyuk Jin turned to him and replied that it would take some time. Ju Hwang smiled and replied that then everything was fine and Hyuk Jin could deal with what he had planned. The red-haired guy turned away from him, smiling slyly. The main character, standing with his back to him, felt something was wrong. He frowned, using his eyes of perception. Now he could feel that Seong Hwa was standing next to him, and Ju Hwang had his back to him. The red-haired boy took a step forward while the girl smiled. Suddenly he turned around, grinning disgustingly. Seong Hwa adjusted her iron fists while looking at Hyuk Jin. Ju Hwang narrowed his snake eyes. It began to glow, and the smile became evil. The main character glanced at him as he interacted with other players. Hyuk Jin felt his gaze. He aimed at Seong Hwa. The guy realized that the leader of the players had revealed his identity when he thought he wasn't looking. Standing with his back to the others, the main character said that he was choosing a reward. He glanced at the system window and selected gloves. The statue agreed, closing its eyes, and said that it was handing over the item to its owner. A golden glove appeared in front of the guy. A system window has appeared. Gloves are particularly resistant to poison. Protect the owner from many infections. Effect: defense +2, poison resistance +3. The statue bowed again and said that he hoped the gloves would be useful on his journey. Hyuk-jin extended his hand towards the object. Several system windows have appeared. You have passed Mandra Square. The area has been cleared. The next quest, 2 Paths, begins. A system window also appeared in front of Seong HWA. Inscription on the system window: 2 ways. The last intersection of Seoul Station. Find a way to pass it. If the clearing fails, a dungeon break will occur. There must be at least 1 player on each path. Hyuk-jin stood next to the girl and said that this dungeon raid was almost completed. She asked if it would be possible to go home after this. He looked at her and said that they were not finished, asking her not to relax and to be close. Seong HWA clenched her hand into a fist and replied that she would be right behind him. Ju Hwang asked him to wait for them. The main character and the girl turned to look at him. The red-haired man bowed his head and stated that he was disappointed. He asked if he considered them a team. Ju Hwang smiled fakely and said that it looked like they had to follow orders, and they didn't agree to that. It was too rude. He opened his eyes and suggested that they wisely split into 2 teams. The main character looked at him with no interest and said that he and Seong HWA would clear 1 path, because the guy himself should understand that there would be enough of them. Ju Hwang put his hands in his pockets and said that he was very confident. He asked why he was so sure that 2 would be enough. The red-haired man grinned and said that it was great to feel confident in a new place, but things could end badly. Yu Hyun started to look tense. He pursed his lips tightly and veins appeared on his face. Hyuk-jin looked at Yu Hyun's trembling fists and replied to Ju Hwang that his words made sense. He turned to the red-haired man and asked how he proposed sharing. Ju Hwang smiled friendly and suggested that we think about balanced groups, in their case 2 groups of 3 and 4 people. According to him, the shortfall of a group of 3 can be covered by Yu Hyun. He remembered how he killed a yak with 1 blow. Ju Hwang asked Hyuk-jin to become the leader of this group, which made Yu Hyun taken aback. The red-haired man narrowed his eyes and said that Seong HWA would join a group of 4 and be a tank. The girl looked confused and scared. Ju Hwang smiled suspiciously and asked about the main character's thoughts. Seong HWA turned away from him and Yu Hyun in embarrassment. Hyuk-jin put his hand on her shoulder. He hugged the girl, smiling widely, repeating Ju Hwang's question. His face immediately became dissatisfied and he replied that he did not have the slightest desire to agree. Seoul Station Dungeon, Mandra Square. The statue had a ring and a bracelet on its hands, and a shield lay nearby. There were other players standing around Ju Hwang. He said that this answer was difficult to understand. The main character replied that he was not going to convince them, it was his decision. He held Seong HWA close to him and said that she was like a little sister to him. He was not going to let her go until they cleared the dungeon. The red-haired one smiled, closing his eyes, and asked if they would be together until the very end. He opened his snake eyes and said that he now wonders where all this confidence comes from. He assumed that he got all the information from the guard. Xenia, who was invisible to the others, was taken aback. Hyuk-jin decided to play along and confirm Ju Hwang's thoughts, which shocked Xenia. The main character didn't care what they thought, because his information was from the future. A system window has appeared. Some guards are interested in the source of your knowledge. This made the guy frown. He mentally insulted them and thought that they could give some information themselves if they were so interested. Ju Hwang smiled slyly, and his henchman looked at the main character with suspicion. Red Hair said that in that case, he understands why Hyuk-jin is so confident, and they will not take Seong HWA with them. He turned his back to Yu Hyun and told him to go with the other group, asking if it would be okay if they split up like that. The main character looked at the guy in the hat and said that they had no objections. Yu Hyun looked at him and said that he would go with them. Everyone agreed to meet after the tracks were cleared. The square was dark and there was dust in the air. Hyuk-jin stood with his group. He looked at the back of Ju Hwang, who was grinning disgustingly and wishing them luck. Several system windows appeared. You entered the first path. Please keep going. There is a clearing hint at the end of the road. It was a long tunnel with burning torches on the walls. A system window appeared. Less than 5 people entered. A temporary safe zone was established. They walked out of the portal. Seong HWA looked around and asked Hyuk-jin if it was enough for them to go to the end. Yu Hyun asked the main character if it was him, and Hyuk-jin turned to him. The guy in the hat raised his hand and said that he was the one who appeared on the 2nd floor of Tower D and fought the troll. He also remembered that they had met before near Cheonggyecheon. Yu Hyun looked at the main character and Seong HWA, saying that he couldn't recognize him in a couple of meetings, but he was always with the child and they didn't tell him anything, so he thought he might have made a mistake, but now he's sure. Hyuk-jin was surprised that he recognized him. He looked at the King of Fists and answered in the affirmative, after which he asked why he remembered this. Yu Hyun clenched his fists in excitement. He bowed very politely and sincerely thanked him for saving him. This made the main character taken aback. Yu Hyun, still bowing, raised his head and called him his hero, because he would have already died if Hyuk-jin had not taken the troll with him. Hyuk-jin was just trying to escape to survive, but decided to remain silent about it, looking awkwardly at the guy. Yu Hyun admitted that he was surprised by their meeting. He placed his hand on his chest and promised that he would not forget about this favor and wanted to return the favor. A system window appeared in front of him: status, favor, respect, admiration, gratitude. The main character saw that the status speaks of his honesty. He would never have thought that he would receive the service of the King of Fists. He smiled shyly and replied that he would remember that. Yu Hyun thanked him again, smiling, and asked if he could call him senior. Hyuk-jin was confused and said that they were the same age. Yu Hyun shouted that it was not a matter of age, because he was the one who saved him. The main character replied that he did not mind. Seong Hwa looked at them with a smile. The torch on the wall burned brightly and crackled. The three of them walked deeper into the tunnel. Suddenly Hyuk-jin stopped and realized that they had arrived. At the end of the tunnel, a dungeon-clearing crystal was floating above a pedestal. The main character sighed in disappointment. Looking at it, he thought that the crystal would be intact. He told Yu Hyun and Seong Hwa to sit down and rest. They were surprised. The light of the crystal was bright. The crystal itself was blue. Hyuk-jin said that they had one tedious task ahead of them. Yu Hyun slowly began to sit down on the floor and asked if he could rest right here. The main character put his sword on the floor and replied that the temporary safe zone was still working. Everything was fine. The three of them sat down next to each other and Hyuk-jin said that they could deal with the crystal later. It was better to accumulate strength for the attack. Yu Hyun's face became very angry and he said that you can't talk to him so respectfully. Hyuk-jin was confused by this, but he agreed. Suddenly Seong Hwa looked at Yu Hyun and asked what to call him if she was Hyuk-jin's little sister. He looked at her confused and replied that she could call him whatever she wanted. She said that then she would call Hyuk-jin Big Brother. The main character poured warm water from a thermos, thinking that it was hard for him to get used to such communication. Seong Hwa said that she will call Yu Hyun Uncle. This even offended him. He shuddered. The main character handed the girl warm water, telling her to drink it, and the guy in the hat was upset. While the girl was drinking water from a thermos, Yu Hyun asked if destroying this crystal should tire them out so much and if it would be difficult to clean up. Hyuk-jin put his hand on the thermos and said that clearing this crystal is directly related to clearing the entire dungeon. Since this is the final battle, traps may await them. He said that they should be prepared for anything. Yu Hyun looked at him questioningly. The main character warned that several problems would appear ahead. A rumble began to come from the dark tunnel. As soon as Hyuk-jin heard this, he tensed. In the corridor walked Ju Hwang and his armed team of players. A thermos without a lid stood on the floor. A system window appeared. New players entered. The main character read this without saying anything. A system window appears. The number of players is more than 5. The temporary safe zone disappears. Seong Hwa and Yu Hyun were taken aback. He asked why the safe zone had disappeared. Hyuk-jin picked up his sword and stood up, telling the others to do the same. He put the blade on his shoulder and said that he would have to fight those guys. A group of players and Ju Hwang gradually approached them. A nasty grin appeared on the red-haired guy's face and he chuckled. He asked if they had cleared the path yet. Seong Hwa and Yu Hyun stood in fighting poses. They were tense. Ju Hwang began to laugh disgustingly. His pupils constricted. He told Hyuk-jin that he thought he would do it much faster because he was so confident in himself. He stated that he was disappointed. The main character stood opposite him and replied that he could be disappointed as much as he wanted, but he was waiting for him. He put the sword on his shoulder and said that he knew he would do something like this. Ju Hwang closed his eyes, grinning, and said that he was pretending to be all-knowing again. He pulled out his knife and said the guy was stupid to the very end. He attacked Hyuk-jin, but he managed to block the attack. Their blades clashed, and Ju Hwang said that he would show at least a little modesty. A crazy smile appeared on his face and he began to press harder on him, saying that he would die by his hand. The main character frowned and asked him if he was sure that he would kill him. The red-haired guy swung the knife again. Hyuk-jin covered his face with his hands, blocking his attacks. Ju Hwang dealt blows one after another, but the main character was able to repel it. The enemy seemed to go crazy. His pupils shrank and he asked what happened and where all his confidence went. He swung the knife, asking if he would only block and dodge. Hyuk-jin ducked under his hand. He took the sword firmly in both hands and swung it. He swung, but Ju Hwang parried the attack with a knife. Holding the knife blade down, he said it was pathetic. He asked if that was all he could do. Blood flowed from the main character's hand. Yu Hyun and Seong Hwa got scared and called out to him. One of the players smiled and asked if they had time to get distracted. Yu Hyun frowned, realizing that they would soon be attacked. The player swung his sword, but the guy was able to take a step back and dodge. He got into a fighting pose with Seong Hwa nearby. The player asked him if he thought he lived up to his fame. Another player stated that in the past they often met those who knew how to fight, but against the group they lost. The guy in the cap had a metal pipe in his hands. The archer behind him said that they hadn't done that for about a month, and it was time to have some fun. They shouted that they would spare Yu Hyun's life if he gave them the girl. This made him angry and he stood in front of Seong Hwa. The players stated that he could swing his fists well, but it was unlikely to work against them. Hyuk-jin held the sword in front of him. Ju Hwang walked towards him, saying that it would become boring if he only defended himself, and asked if there were any other tricks. He smiled disgustingly and said that they were on the same level against monsters, but in battles with other players he was worthless. The main character did not answer him, continuing to look at him. A system window has appeared. The Whispering Devil is enjoying the insults you heard. Ju Hwang continued to grin, saying that the guy was unlucky. Hyuk-jin stated that he had ways to counter the players, which made the opponents taken aback. The main character reached for the thermos on the floor and said that he had not mastered the shadow attack. Ju Hwang grinned and squeezed the knife so hard that the veins on his arms bulged. He raised his dagger and told him to keep showing off so it would be easier to finish him off. Hyuk-jin held out a thermos and asked if he would try to kill them if he didn't hand over Seong Hwa to him. The red-haired guy put the knife in front of him and said that before he could have just let him go, but now he would kill him and take the girl. He ran forward, swinging his knife powerfully. The main character was still standing with the thermos outstretched. His face remained calm and focused. When the enemy approached him, he hit him in the chest with a metal thermos. Ju Hwang was taken aback and started coughing up blood. Yu Hyun and Seong Hwa looked at this battle with concern. Hyuk-jin told his enemy to remember his words. What happens next is the result of his decisions. He pulled the sword back, pointing the tip at his opponent. An hour earlier, there were two dark corridors. The tired-eyed archer asked if they would be coming in and if they needed to clear the dungeon faster, since the administrator had blocked the entrance to the dungeon. Ju Hwang raised his hand with a knife and said that they could no longer continue this performance. He narrowed his eyes, grinning, and said that he would rip the guy's head off and take the baby. Their entire group was assembled. The archer asked if they would attack after they finished. Ju Hwang replied that if it took too long, they would come in and kill them. They didn't go on their way, so the Hyuk-jin group will be more tired in their opinion. The red-haired guy, smiling disgustingly, said that Hyuk-jin could not do anything, no matter how cool he thought he was. The guy in the cap asked him if the guy knew how to fight and if it was dangerous. Ju Hwang asked if they had seen him hunt yaks, saying that was his limit. He raised one eyebrow and said that his characteristics are not much better than theirs. You need to worry about Yu Hyun. He ordered his henchmen to hold him back until he dealt with Hyuk-jin. Their battle continued. Ju Hwang had difficulty stopping the protagonist's sword. Hyuk-jin continued to put pressure on him. His opponent could not cope with him. He pulled away, his face shocked as he noticed that Hyuk-jin's fighting style had changed. He assumed that his stats had increased. The main character swung his sword again, without letting go of the thermos. The archer pulled the bowstring and suddenly called out to Ju Hwang. Yu Hyun ran towards him with an angry face. The guy with the bangs swung at him and asked if he would ignore him. The King of Fists looked at the approaching sword in horror. Suddenly Seong Hwa used a platinum shield and protected the guy. The player was taken aback, looking at her, and could not believe that this little thing blocked the attack. Seong Hwa turned around and called out to Yu Hyun. He thanked her and then clenched his hand into a fist. He used a powerful fist skill and hit the enemy in the chest. The enemy flew into the wall, breaking it. His ally called out to him. The guy in the cap ran past the archer and ordered him to quickly help Ju Hwang and return to them. The archer fired his bow, releasing the string. The protagonist's sword bounced off his opponent's knife. Something flew past his face. It was an arrow. Hyuk-jin deftly dodged. He felt the trajectory of each attack. Ju Hwang was taken aback. He gritted his teeth and became even more angry. Yu Hyun was also surprised by his ally's movements. The archer readied another arrow and asked how he could avoid the arrow coming from his blind spot. He pulled back the string and ordered Hyuk-jin not to approach. The main character at that time thought that the archer was the main pillar of all the unexpected attacks of their group. While the player was aiming at him, he shouted at Ju Hwang to kill the guy. Hyuk-jin understood that in some sense he was more dangerous than Ju Hwang himself, because he could help from a great distance. But he needed a person who would protect him. Yu Hyun appeared behind the archer. The enemy was taken aback. He removed the arrow and insulted him, after which Yu Hyun asked what he called him. He began to flex his fists and with an angry face said that he was not the one trying to kidnap the little girl here. The archer loaded the arrow again and fearfully ordered him not to approach. He again asked Ju Hwang for help, but at that time he was at a loss. The protagonist looked at the unconscious archer, thinking that the King of Fists had become stronger. Ju Hwang thought that things couldn't end like this. He looked at his archer in the pool of blood, not understanding how their plan could have failed. He was shaking with anger, thinking that they should have won, and did not understand where he had miscalculated. Ju Hwang glanced at the approaching Hyuk-jin, thinking that he was not that skilled and looked like he had the characteristics of a 10th level. The red-haired guy began to sweat and was breathing heavily, realizing that the main character was now even stronger than Yu Hyun. He covered his chest with his hands. He wanted to calm down and find an opportunity to counterattack. The red-haired guy believed that Hyuk-jin might have stronger characteristics, but did not know his own skills. He smiled madly, his pupils constricted. The main character waved his hand with a calm face. Water splashed onto Ju Hwang, causing him to be taken aback. He looked at the wet palm, not understanding what kind of attack it was. The water was at room temperature. He looked at Hyuk-jin with an empty thermos in his hands, not knowing if he was holding the thermos for the sake of it. The red-haired guy, doused with water, asked if he was kidding. Hyuk-jin smiled, closing his eyes, and answered negatively. He asked him to turn around, which made Ju Hwang taken aback. The enemy looked back tensely. A huge insect leg, yellow and black in color, appeared from the wall. A huge bee with a sharp sting flew into the room. The wall began to collapse. There was a barrier in the shape of a purple honeycomb, and there were even more bees. Ju Hwang looked at the insects in horror. The bees surrounded the rest of the Ju Hwang team. The guy with freckles frowned and shouted in fear that there were monster bees here. Bees were flying around the archer. He did not understand what was happening. A bee stung him on the back. Another bee bit him on the lower back. Ju Hwang fought off the insects, ordering them to stand down. He brandished his knife, screaming in fear. The bees continued to circle around him as he waved them off. Hyuk-jin looked at him. He knew that they were very sensitive to the sweet smell. Honey water was enough to cause a reaction. It was a raid event taking place on two paths called Bee Attack. Despite the name, dealing with them is not so easy. These insects had thin wings and a large sting. Their individual level was about 18. However, they attack in packs of thousands of individuals. The players waved their weapons in panic, driving away the bees. The main character knew that if there is no one in the group with fire attacks, then it is better to avoid them, and there is only one strategy for this. Hyuk-jin turned to Seong Hwa and Yu Hyun, ordering them to quickly lie down on the ground. They quickly lay down on the floor with their stomachs down. Yu Hyun raised his head, watching the bees fly. The main character leaned on his elbows. He knew that he could get an advantage, because insects do not notice targets that are below a certain height. A huge number of bees began to sting Ju Hwang. The pain from even one poisonous sting is indescribable. The red-haired guy was bleeding from his body. He could barely hold back his tears. The veins on his face were swollen. He begged for help. The bees continued to look at him. The insects attacked him over and over again, preventing him from escaping. Hyuk-jin looked at him with a frown. The honeycomb was gone, leaving only a huge hole in the wall. The main character got up from the floor. Stones were lying everywhere. He brushed off the dirt from his clothes. He looked at Ju Hwang's corpse without saying anything. The red-haired guy was withered. There were traces of his blood on his clothes. Hyuk-jin believed that if he was willing to kill others, he should be willing to die himself. According to the guy, he himself is to blame for this outcome. His face was blank as he looked at the corpse. A system window appeared. The system recognized the situation as the murder of a player. The player's first kill after finishing the tutorial. Hyuk-jin carefully read the new information. Several system windows have appeared. A unique ability has been forcibly unlocked. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It is right to return what you received, especially when it comes to revenge. A unique ability is activated if a player attacks you first. If you do not respond to a player's attack, you will receive debuffs. Attack power, attack speed, and critical strike chance have been increased by 7%, and mana consumption has been reduced by 7%. If you don't respond to a player's attack, the items above will become debuffs. There is a small chance of cramps if you don't respond to the player's attack. Hyuk-jin believed that there could be no new ability. He already had eyes of perception. It was too strange to gain the skill at such an early stage. He was taken aback if the face looked confused, because he already had a second skill. This ability was familiar to him, despite the fact that the conditions force him to respond to attacks. But in return he is given enhancements that help him fight against players. He imagined two people fighting with swords. In the time of the main character, this was not a very rare ability, which was greatly revealed in PvP. He put one hand in his pocket, looking at the system window. He recalled that even those taking the civil service exam knew about the ability, but it was hidden. He frowned and pursed his lips. The main character remembered how he received the exam results in a previous life. He then clenched his teeth in anger, not understanding why. Yu Hyan came up behind him and called out to him. Hyuk-jin turned to him. He said that he was not to blame for this, because they did not deserve to live. Seong Hwa agreed with him and said Hyuk-jin didn't do anything wrong. The main character looked at them slightly confused. They thought he was blaming himself, so they tried to console him. They looked at the guy knowingly. He smiled awkwardly, saying that everything was fine. Hyuk-jin did not feel anything good, but said that it would be strange to let people go who want to kill them. It would lead to their deaths. Now the corpses of the players were lying on the floor. Ju Hwang's face froze in a grimace of horror. The main character did not regret his decision. He frowned sadly and said that it was better to become a killer than to get killed. Several system windows have appeared. A woman with a scale understands your true feelings. A woman with a scale is thinking about giving a big gift. Seong Hwa and Yu Hyan looked at the guy silently. They felt trust, confidence, and respect. Hyuk-jin stood with his back to them, thinking that these were strong emotions. However, this situation did not shock him much even without their support. Suddenly he opened his eyes wider in surprise, noticing that he was more careless than usual about what was happening. It seems he has changed a lot too. A slight haze hung in the long corridor. The blue crystal continued to hover above the pedestal. The main character approached it and sighed. The dungeon is almost cleared. You need to destroy the crystals of two paths. Hyuk-jin frowned. He was feeling tense. Suddenly the crystal changed its color and black circles appeared on it. A system window has appeared. The Soul Station crystal is not happy with intruders. The wind began to blow around the pedestal, and a strange hum appeared. Hyuk-jin's eyes of perception detected danger. Everyone in the group was taken aback. Seong Hwa called out to the guy in concern, but he ordered them to step back. A strong wind blew their clothes and hair. The girl asked what Hyuk-jin would do. He replied that he needed to deal with it. He calmed her down and then opened his inventory. He had several honeybee stings in his hand and he also put on a glove. The main character covered his face. He was preparing measures against the poisonous gas of the crystal. He clutched the bee's stings in his gloved hand. He took the gloves as a reward due to the increased resistance to poison, even though it was weak. The guy understood that this would not be enough to completely neutralize the effect. His pupils constricted and sweat ran down his face. A system window has appeared. Soul Station Crystal Poison Resistance. Hyuk-jin clenched his hand into a fist as he looked at the crystal, thinking that he needed to destroy it before the effect became too strong. There were purple trails in the air around him, his hair blowing in the wind. He frowned and noticed that the haze had become denser. He saw nothing in front of him. The crystal disappeared from sight. Several system windows have appeared. The poison of the crystal penetrates the body. Poison resistance. All this time the main character was not breathing. He grabbed his chest and realized that he could no longer hold his breath. A system window has appeared. The eyes of perception sensed serious danger. His eyes began to glow and his cheeks puffed out. Visibility was significantly reduced. He could not see the crystal. Hyuk-jin gradually walked forward and saw a glimmer in the distance. He squeezed the stingers in his hand tighter. He raised his hand, pursing his lips. The main character struck the crystal, gritting his teeth. The fog became thicker. Yu Hyan and Seong Hwa stood behind. Yu Hyan covered his mouth with his hand, not understanding why Hyuk-jin was coming even closer. Hyuk-jin himself continued to stand near the crystal. He was sweating heavily. A system window appeared. The effect of the poison of the Soul Station crystal began to be neutralized. His fingertips began to turn black and his sleeve tore. Despite this, he did not remove his hand from the crystal. The crystal disappeared. The pedestal was empty. The protagonist's neck seemed to be covered with hematomas, and he was breathing heavily. Seong Hwa and Yu Hyan looked worriedly at his trembling hand, which had turned blue. It was more difficult than Hyuk-jin expected, but he did it. He looked wearily at the blue crystal in his hand. Several system windows have appeared. The crystal of the soul station has been received. One of the 2 clearing conditions has been fulfilled. An unknown observer is watching with interest. The whispering devil is disappointed. Hyuk-jin took the test tube in his hand, frowning, and thought that his enemy wanted him dead. He began to drink the potion. Yu Hyun asked him how he did it, because he himself could not see anything through the smoke. The main character lowered his gaze and asked if he remembered the bee's stings that they obtained earlier, after which he said that it helped neutralize the poison. Yu Hyun looked at him in surprise and asked how he knew that the stingers would help. Hyuk-jin replied that it was written in the item description. His ally asked if he had risked relying only on this description. The main character began to clench and unclench his fist, answering in the affirmative. In fact, this was the strategy of the great explorer Jackson. Yu Hyun and Seong Hwa looked at the guy in amazement. He told them to go. They went out into a long corridor, lit by torches, and the main character said that they had figured out one crystal. The second should be easier. Senia looked at him with an emotionless face. She hovered over Hyuk-jin as he walked towards the second crystal. The administrator thought that he used bees not only to get rid of Ju Hwang, but also obtained items that neutralized the poison. He clenched the stingers in his gloves again. A system window appeared. Channel number 19,207 was filled with a large number of anonymous guards. Senia frowned slightly, thinking that this was such an obvious strategy that she didn't need to explain anything. A system window appeared. The true master of the heavenly demonic mountain entered channel number 19,207. The air was filled with fog and poison again. The main character held his breath and raised his fist. He kept his hand on the crystal again, gritting his teeth. Several system windows appeared. The soul station crystal was received. The conditions for clearing the dungeon have been met. The dungeon has been cleared. The dungeon breach is sealed. Blue chains appeared around the portal to the dungeon. Senia began to appear in the room where the main character and his allies were. She appeared in front of Hyuk-jin, particles of light hovering around her. She said she would give out rewards. Yu Hyun was amazed by her beauty. The main character said that it must be something special for her to come in person. She raised her hand and answered in the affirmative, saying that bonus stat points would be credited to all players in the group that completed the dungeon. She announced that player Hyuk-jin could choose a personal reward. A system window appeared in front of him. Select a reward. Gold weighing 3.75 kilograms. Restoration elixir of type A. Restoration elixir of type B. The main character remembered that after the first clearing, you can choose one of several rewards. A system window appears. An unknown observer is interested in your choice. Hyuk-jin was calm. He was thinking about the most significant reward. He looked at the list again and thought about gold, because it is a direct enrichment, but it is not so easy to cash out. He put his hand to his chin as he began to think. 3.75 kilograms is about 200 million won, not a very large amount when compared to the future story dungeon. An ordinary person would choose gold without any doubt. This is money that Hyuk-jin could not even dream of. He was still in thought, his eyes narrowed slightly. In the early stages, players' rights were not protected by law, so players had to give a significant part of what they found to the state. He presented a multi-story bank building. The main character remembered that even gold was confiscated, because it was an object from an unknown world that could be dangerous. It sounds unfair, but there's nothing you can do about it. He presented the scrolls, skulls, and stones found by the players. The guy will be lucky if the government doesn't take everything when he tries to cash out. He closed his eyes, removed his hand from his face, and decided to give up the gold. He selected the Type B restoration elixir with a wave of his hand. Several system windows appeared. The unknown observer was curious. A Libra woman doubts your choice. The whispering devil is pleased with your choice. The guy had a bottle of elixir in his hands. A system window appears. The dungeon breach is sealed. Hyuk-jin and his allies approached the gate. The green bus was driving along the road next to the stop. A girl and a guy were standing near the doors inside the bus. Kim Ayoung was sitting on the seat. She asked with a contemptuous face what she herself thought about the move. She asked her brother where he got the money from. Hyuk-jin lowered his head and replied that he had been saving a little. He had about 100 million. Kim Ayoung turned away from him and asked if he was drunk. The main character looked at her without saying anything. He looked at the ceiling. The guy could understand her doubts. Their entire family had never had the amount of 100 million. The elixir he chose looked like honey. It is very effective against a specific disease. He remembered a building he had recently visited. The main character took the elixir and went to meet one person, as Ju Hwang did in the original past. He introduced the gray-haired man and Ju Hwang, who smiled slyly. The man was rich enough to pay a large sum for the item and was suffering from a disease that the elixir could cure. The buyer met two conditions. Hyuk-jin brought the elixir to the meeting while wearing a shirt and tie. In his previous life, Ju Hwang received about 1,000,000,000. A man with a gray beard and an expensive suit smiled and raised his hand. Suddenly the smile disappeared from his face and he began to worry. If everything is as it was in the past life, the transaction will end successfully. The man took the bottle of elixir in his hands and began to open the cap. He started drinking the potion while the main character looked at him. He understood that this would give not only money, but also connections with influential people. Kim Ah-young looked at her smartphone and was surprised by something. Her little brother looked at her and asked if she saw something interesting. She said she was just watching the news and the Sungshin chairman appeared. A photo of a gray-haired man in an expensive suit appeared on her phone screen. Kim Ah-young said she thought Gi Yao was a bald old man. She put her hand to his chin and assumed he was wearing a realistic wig. The main character looked slightly tense, thinking that this was real hair. He saw how it grew after taking the elixir. After emptying the bottle, Gi Yao's head grew thick and lush gray hair. Another name for the elixir is the most effective remedy against baldness. Although it talks about restoration, it is just a cure for hair loss. Gi Yao, with his hair growing back, was in a daze as Hyuk-jin looked at him. However, the man who himself built a giant corporation from scratch saw the potential for investment. The main character raised his hands and asked for 100 million in cash and housing by special request. Gi Yao also agreed to help with the adoption of Seong Hwa, whose further fate was shrouded in darkness. He imagined the girl surrounded by her older sister and mother. His mother immediately realized that she was a smart and cheerful girl, so she agreed. Hyuk-jin smiled, looking at his sister, and again started talking about moving, because he bought them a new house. He said his family would be able to live in a nice place and have less stress with work. Kim Ah-young looked out the window and agreed indifferently. A blue portal, a gate, appeared near the sidewalk. The main character looked out the window and told his sister that it was better for everyone to return home early today. People walked past the portal as if not noticing it. One girl stopped in the crowd and looked at the gate. She opened her mouth nervously, not saying anything. Hyuk-jin was taken aback when he saw the portal. At that moment he offered to have dinner with his mother, but was interrupted. The bus they were sitting on passed the gate. The main character looked with alarm at the new gates that appeared immediately after the opening of the previous ones. There was no one left around the portal except that girl. Hyuk-jin watched this with tension from the bus window. It was Young-so. She had long hair and was wearing a sundress. The guy recognized her. The main character pressed the stop button and told Kim Ah-young that there was an urgent matter and he would leave early. She replied that it was too far for a walk. He stood near the door, holding the handrail. He thought that at this time, only one gate could have appeared near the Hongyi area, the first public clearing of the dungeon by the Sword Empress, which was described very briefly. Young-so stood in front of the gate while Hyuk-jin remembered that the records of this dungeon were not left because it was somehow special. Young-so, the Sword Empress, was the strongest PvP player who passed it first. At this moment she stood with a confused look. The main character approached her and asked if she was going to come in. Young-so turned to him and asked if he saw it too. She didn't understand who he was. Hyuk-jin, with a calm face, replied that he was a player, so he also saw the gate. He couldn't find information about the girl in 2028. It seemed to him that this lively and sweet atmosphere was different from the two-faced killer she was called. Young-so smiled friendly and asked if he knew anything about this thing since he was a player. A status window appears. Young-so, player. Level 19, age 20. No title, class or guard. Unique ability, one-hit kill. Status, curiosity, fear, interest. Worldview, exploration, challenge, positivity. Brief description, pure, two-faced, falls in love easily. The main character didn't understand why short descriptions were always so strange. He looked at the portal with an emotionless face and said that this thing is called a gate, and monsters will come out of there if the dungeon is not cleared in time. Young-so was surprised and remembered that the administrator mentioned this. Hyuk-jin remained calm while speaking to her. He said that this had not happened yet because the other dungeons had already been cleared. But even those who had undergone training spoke about the possibility of a breakthrough, so it must be true. The girl was taken aback and realized that she was talking about the same guy. The main character thought that at this time not a single breakthrough had happened yet, because he could use his knowledge to clear the gate immediately after its appearance. In his previous life, the Soul Station dungeon had been breached several times. The cruel bees escaped the dungeon. Many players gave their lives to understand the clearing strategy. This time everything changed due to his intervention. There would soon be so many gates that he wouldn't be able to clear them all alone, so breakthroughs were inevitable. Hyuk-jin put his hand on his shoulder and asked the girl if she planned to come in. She clenched her hands into fists and asked if she could, because the one who had undergone training had no problems, but she might have them. The main character replied that everything would be fine, thinking that in PvP she would even defeat Yu Hyun. He asked her if she wanted to start a group. Youngso was taken aback and hesitantly asked whether to form a group with him. She looked at the guy and asked what level he was. Hyuk Jin replied that he was level 19. The girl blushed and said with a smile that she was not the only one, and that was good, because she also had level 19. She opened the system window and tried to send an invitation. She succeeded. A system window appears. You have accepted the invitation to the Youngso group. The girl asked how old he was. The main character was a little embarrassed by her question. He answered with an awkward face that he was 20 years old. Youngso was surprised and said that she thought he was older. Mentally he is 30, but his body is younger. The girl smiled and offered to communicate without formalities, because they were the same age. They approached the gate and Hyuk Jin suggested that they discuss this when they get out of the dungeon alive. She lightly hit him on the shoulder and said that they would definitely survive. A system window appears and you enter the instant gate. The main character looked at the portal. He did not think that he would stumble upon the gate on his way back from Sungshin. This was a chance to see the dungeon that the Sword Empress went through right after her training. There was a slight haze and air current around the portal. Kim Il-young dropped her grocery bag when she saw it. She had just left the store and was taken aback, not understanding where her brother had gone. A system window appeared. Instant gate, underground tunnel. It was a cave with stalactites. The main character came out of the portal and decided to look around a little. The passage was not closed. Escape was unlikely to be impossible. He thought that if Youngso was able to complete the dungeon alone after training, then it shouldn't be difficult. The system announced that monsters were appearing. Hyuk Jin was surprised, opening his eyes wide. He saw white rabbit ears. There were 3 red-eyed rabbit monsters, their levels ranging from 18 to 20. Youngso began to draw her sword, surprised by the size of the rabbits. She said they were like boss monsters but didn't look strong. The main character mentally agreed with her, because the level of danger of monsters is easier to determine, unlike players. He looked at the rabbits, which were almost the size of a person, but they were almost non-threatening, not so aggressive. The rabbits seemed to start to blur. Their main feature was to escape at high speed if they noticed danger. The monster quickly jumped away from the players. Youngso was taken aback. Hyuk Jin looked at her and told her that they run away when they sense a threat, so it is better to kill with one hit if possible. He asked if she could handle it. The girl smiled as she prepared her sword and replied that she had just the right skill. The main character also took out his weapon. Looking at her, he was sure that this was the same Sword Empress who had one-hit kill. The rabbit quickly jumped from one place to another. The girl's sword became covered in blue light. She struck the monster with lightning speed. The rabbit was killed and its corpse began to disappear. The girl received experience and 26 coins. The main character looked at her with little interest. He did not think that the girl would learn to use her unique ability so quickly. Youngso attacked the next rabbit. The guy felt a change in the atmosphere. She cut the monster into 2 parts, and a moment ago she looked like an ordinary student. The girl smiled, sweat dripping from her face. Now she looks like the fight fan she will become in 10 years. The main character concentrated and swung his sword. He also cut the rabbit in half. Hyuk Jin did not expect that there would be rabbits behind this gate. The rabbit monster was killed and its corpse began to evaporate. The main character knew that he was hard to kill because of his speed, but his attack and defense were weak. Monsters that are known among players for one feature. The guy lowered his head, thinking that he could get that item if he was lucky. Youngso looked at him silently. She turned to the guy and asked if he was there, to which Hyuk Jin replied that it was his first time here. It seemed to her that he dealt with it too quickly. The main character said that she herself killed with one blow. The girl embarrassedly patted her head and offered to dispense with formalities. They were the same age. She didn't feel comfortable speaking politely. She asked his name. Hyuk Jin looked at the girl and said his name. She introduced herself and asked where he got so much information about the gate. The portal was spinning slowly, emitting a bright light. The main character remembered his sleepless nights when he was preparing for exams. Then he learned all this. Hyuk Jin did not tell the truth and answered evasively that you need to study a lot to know everything. Youngso smiled and asked if he really thought she would be happy with that answer. A system window appeared. The Whispering Devil was amused by your answer. More rabbits began to appear from the portal. The guy prepared his sword and offered to talk when they deal with the monsters. The girl agreed and said that they would quickly cope. The rabbits looked at them gloomily. The main character knew that among the drops falling from them, there was an item that helps break the growth limit at levels from 30 to 40. The monsters attacked him. He swung his sword. He realized that it was stupid to wait for an item to drop after a couple of kills. Hyuk-jin was determined as he prepared to attack. He wasn't going to leave until he got it. Xenia watched the rabbits jumping. Someone told her that Hyuk-jin is an amazing player. The administrator turned her gaze to the side. It was the administrator Roa, who looked like a fairy. She asked if Xenia was broadcasting with him. Angel answered in the affirmative. Roa pointed at the guy with a grin and asked if he was definitely level 19. Because there weren't many players who could keep up with Young-so. She decided to look at the status, but a system window appeared, access denied. Xenia lowered her gaze and said that he had configured the viewing rights for personal information. He not only closed the status window, but also deleted his name from the player ranking table. This made Roa taken aback. She asked how he even knew about this and whether Xenia had told him about it. Angel closed her eyes wearily and replied that she didn't do it. The fairy crossed her arms and said that she saw the players using the system, but he used it to hide everything. She even suggested that he would take advantage of someone frivolous at the first opportunity. Roa looked at Hyuk-jin in amazement and asked if she could broadcast it too, since it probably brings in a good income. Xenia replied that this was also impossible. The fairy looked at her in surprise. Angel turned to her and replied that she had entered into an exclusive contract. Roa exclaimed that this could be done 3 times, and asked how she could waste one attempt so quickly, since he could only show such growth at the beginning. The rabbit madly attacked Hyuk-jin. Xenia replied to the fairy that it was none of her business. The main character deftly cut the rabbit, gaining experience and 25 coins. The rabbit's corpse began to disappear, and a system window appeared. Item received. It was an iron sword with a long blade. A system window appeared. An iron sword made by a good craftsman. Has good durability and attack power. Rarity, common, attack power 7 to 18, durability 300 out of 300. Hyuk-jin grabbed the hilt of the sword. He threw the weapon to Young-so and called out to her. She caught the sword deftly and the guy told her to use this sword if it was better than hers. She was surprised and asked if he wanted to give it away. The main character picked up his old sword and replied that she was better with weapons. Young-so thanked him sincerely. She promised that the next item would go to him. The main character looked at the jumping monsters and said that they had agreed with her. He swung his sword, thinking that he did not need a weapon. He has a general idea of the monsters that will appear in 10 years. His weapons are sufficient for now, so a high-quality iron sword can be given away. The guy hit the rabbit. Monsters jumped from side to side around him. He did not understand how many more he would have to kill. A new army of rabbits has appeared. The main character thought that it would be better to drop the item before they reached the monster revival limit. Suddenly, when killing another rabbit, an item was obtained. Hyuk-jin instantly caught what fell from the rabbit. In his hands was a glowing thing. Legola's golden ring lay in his hand. A system window appeared, a ring obtained by smelting topaz with mystical powers. Defense 1, effect, health absorption equal to 2% of attack. Suddenly something caught the guy's attention. Hyuk-jin saw a pedestal with a floating crystal appear. He opened his mouth in shock, surprised that the clearing crystal had appeared so quickly.